Chapter 986. As Wu-Ming pondered, Gorgon's body cracked even more. Finally, without saying a word, Gorgon's huge body shattered and turned into mana particles that dissipated in the underworld. At this point, the magical beast goddess who had wreaked havoc in Mesopotamia for half a year was killed in an extremely aggrieved manner by having her heart pierced by an enemy while she was unprepared. At the same time, in the southwest forest, in the territory of the feathered serpent god, Anna, who had been injured by fighting against Uxiu Mughar, suddenly looked in a certain direction in the north as if she had telepathically sensed something. The cloaked girl hugged her body with both hands and looked as if she did not know what to do. She muttered silently. Gorgon. In the underworld, Wu-Ming did not feel proud or guilty about killing Gorgon. After all, even if they were to fight face to face, he could still kill Gorgon. It would just be a little more troublesome. It could only be said that it was a matter of luck. Who would have thought that Gorgon would come to the underworld? Who would have thought that Ereshkigal would join forces with Wu-Ming? Who would have thought that Wu-Ming would take advantage of Ereshkigal's restraining of Gorgon to send the divine blade of salvation into Gorgon's heart? This was the so-called time and fate. With a wave of his hand, Wu-Ming took the divine blade of salvation into his hand and raised it high. Light once again shone on the underworld, but this time the light was gentler than before. When Gorgon broke free, some of the black soil flowed into the underworld. Wu-Ming was responsible for dealing with it. No, it should be said that only Wu-Ming, who had mastered the power of the source, could completely eliminate the black soil. Ereshkigal, who was behind Wu-Ming, once again fell into a daze because of the light shining on the underworld. After a short while, the remaining black soil of the underworld was cleaned up by Wu-Ming. The light disappeared and Wu-Ming put away the divine blade of salvation. Wu-Ming turned around and looked at Ereshkigal, who was still sitting on the ground in a daze. What are you doing? Why are you in a daze? Wu-Ming's words brought Ereshkigal back to her senses and she immediately lowered her head. Although the underworld was still dark, Wu-Ming could still see Ereshkigal's red cheeks due to embarrassment. However, Wu-Ming was also used to Ereshkigal's girlish behavior. She was much more pleasing to the eye than Ishtar. Ereshkigal, what are you going to do next? Ereshkigal was a little confused. What did he mean by, what are you going to do next? Well, let me ask another question. Gorgon, one of the three goddesses, has left. I have also drawn the other pillar goddess to the human side. Now you are the only enemy left. The alliance between the three goddesses has indirectly collapsed. Are you going to continue attacking the Uruk, or are you going to stop? It was precisely because people thought of her as the mother goddess of fear that Ereshkigal would dress up as the mother goddess of fear. Because her heart was not the character of the mother goddess of fear, she did not pretend to be the mother goddess of fear in time when she discovered Wu-Ming. Instead, she maintained her original character. Because of this, Ereshkigal panicked because she was afraid that the secret of her disguise as the mother goddess of fear would be discovered. How could a girl who would try her best to play such a role because of rumors and panicked and broke her disguise, when her little secret was discovered, be a bad person? And the most important point, a person who will subconsciously say thank you to others. I really don't think such a person is the so-called mother goddess of fear. Ereshkigal was much better than Ishtar in this way. Since Wu-Ming had said so much, no matter how stupid Ereshkigal was, she could understand that Wu-Ming had almost figured it out, even if he was just guessing. Then Ereshkigal spoke. You're right. I don't want to destroy the Uruk like Gorgon. I only want to protect the souls of humans. Evil will also help humans in evil ways. This is my way. Chapter 987. Wu-Ming thought to himself, sure enough. Learning from Ereshkigal, and guessing on your own, were two completely different things. When Ereshkigal admitted it, Wu-Ming was also relieved. After all, this could prove that Ereshkigal and Quetzalcoatl were the same. They were both gods who cared about humans but used special methods to save them. So, back to my previous question, what are you going to do next? The only evil god in the three goddesses alliance who wanted to destroy humans had already left, and the other good god had long been instigated by Wu-Ming. In the three goddesses alliance, only Ereshkigal was left. It was natural that Wu-Ming would ask Ereshkigal what she was going to do next. However, Ereshkigal sighed. The forced suppression of Gorgon just now consumed almost all of my divinity, and my behavior just now could be considered to have caused harm to Gorgon. The covenant of the three goddesses alliance is not something I can defy. At this moment, I am only able to survive because of the relationship between the underworld and me. If it was not for the connection between the underworld and me that allowed me to survive, you might not be able to see me. I think you should be very clear about this point. After all, in Ereshkigal's view, It was inconceivable that Wu-Ming could not detect the changes in her now. Indeed, as Ereshkigal said, Wu-Ming had actually been aware of the changes in Ereshkigal's body at this moment. The divinity in Ereshkigal's body had almost completely disappeared, and Ereshkigal's spiritual base had also become extremely fragile, as if it would break with a touch. Ereshkigal immediately asked, "Why don't you just kill me directly? Right now I am extremely weak. After all, I am a member of the Three Goddesses Alliance, an enemy of mankind." What Ereshkigal meant was that once she was killed, there would be no follow-up troubles. There would be no need to ask what Ereshkigal was going to do next, and there would be no need to worry that Ereshkigal would continue to deal with the humans. After she was killed, the Three Goddesses Alliance would truly collapse, and the humans would be saved. This singularity would also be fine. It was simply a profitable business. However, Wu-Ming shook his head. "I can even spare the good gods who do evil, so why can't I spare the evil gods who do good?" Ereshkigal was stunned. She knew that Wu-Ming was comparing her to Ishtar. Indeed, although Ishtar was a good god, Ishtar often did some evil things. Although the degree of evil was not high, the sentence "do not do evil because it is small" was always useful. On the other hand, Ereshkigal was an evil god in name, but she joined the Three Goddesses Alliance to deal with the humans in a roundabout way. She thought that she could not save Mesopotamia, so in order to save the humans she chose to collect the souls of the humans and store them in the underworld to save them. Ereshkigal's approach was somewhat similar to that of Artoria, who had the Holy Lance, but after all, they were different. After all, Ereshkigal only preserved the souls of the humans. Ishtar and Ereshkigal were different sides of the same divinity, so it was natural to compare them. The enemy of the humans is not the Three Goddesses Alliance. The only enemy of the humans is the goddess of warcraft. Ereshkigal and Quetzalcoatl did not join the Three Goddesses Alliance with the purpose of destroying the humans. They joined the Three Goddesses Alliance to help and save the humans. "But Gorgon has already been destroyed by you, right?" Without talking about the goddess of warcraft, Wu-Ming directly answered Ereshkigal on the other hand. "Didn't I say that I am Ishtar's teacher, and you are Ishtar's sister, so you are also half my disciple? The mistakes made by the disciple should be corrected and made up for by the teacher. Although it is natural for the teacher to punish the disciple, your safety is also part of my responsibility. After knowing your secret, if I still choose to kill you, then it is really my fault. And if Ishtar knows about it, she will not forgive me." Regardless of whether these words were true or false, Wu-Ming was not prepared to destroy Ereshkigal. Wu-Ming's meaning was very clear, so how could Ereshkigal not understand? Suddenly, some tears appeared in Ereshkigal's eyes. This was the first time someone cared about her. But if Wu-Ming knew what Ereshkigal was thinking, he would probably laugh it off. With Ereshkigal's EQ, which was raised as a young lady who did not know about the world because she stayed in the underworld for a long time, she probably would not realize that someone cared about her. For example, Ishtar, who was actually very concerned about her half. However, one was too arrogant and did not show any concern, while the other's EQ was too low and did not notice the other's concern. This caused both of them to not realize the other's meaning, which was really regrettable. And the most important reason, then Wu-Ming's tone changed. "The goddess of warcraft is still alive." "Huh?" Ereshkigal was dumbfounded. Could it be that Gorgon was fake? Was that why Kingu did not come to save her? But that was impossible. Gorgon was completely real to Ereshkigal. How could he be fake? Then Wu-Ming answered Ereshkigal's doubts. "The real goddess of warcraft is Tiamat." Ereshkigal was stunned. But, Wu-Ming naturally knew what Ereshkigal wanted to say. She was just asking for the reason. "The reason is that the fake Enkidu's body allowed me to kill Gorgon." Wu-Ming's eyes narrowed. "Huh? What kind of reason was that? I've seen Gorgon and Kingu a few times before. I can feel that Kingu cares about Gorgon from the bottom of his heart. It's not fake." Ereshkigal expressed her opinion. "Oh, you also call the fake Kingu?" Ereshkigal understood what Wu-Ming meant. Of course, she knew that the fake Kingu was not the real goddess of warcraft. That's what he calls himself. Let's just call him that for now. Ereshkigal sighed helplessly, probably because she felt helpless about Wu-Ming's seriousness. "Then let's call him Kingu." It didn't matter if he called the fake Enkidu or Kingu. After all, it was just a small matter. There was no need to harp on it. The key was the relationship between Kingu and Gorgon. As you said, Kingu's feelings for Gorgon are real. Then why did Kingu allow Gorgon to leave? Wu-Ming followed Kingu into the underworld, but Kingu was nowhere to be found. This was very strange. Ereshkigal was speechless. Indeed, Kingu's feelings for Gorgon were real. But if that was the case, why did Kingu abandon Gorgon? The only answer is that Kingu's feelings are not for Gorgon, but for the goddess of warcraft. Chapter 988. It was obviously wrong to say that Gorgon, who held part of Tiamat's authority, was not the goddess of magical beasts. However, it was also wrong to say that Gorgon was the goddess of magical beasts, because Gorgon did not have the authority to give birth to magical beasts. Gorgon had only borrowed Tiamat's authority. That was why Kingu often called himself the son of the goddess of magical beasts, and not Gorgon's son. Even if Gorgon is dead, the goddess of magical beasts is still alive. That's why Kingu abandoned Gorgon. The underworld extended in all directions, and there were many stone pillars and bridges. It was not difficult to circle around Wuming and return to the surface. Meanwhile, Wuming was chasing after Gorgon and Funbaba, and neglected Kingu. Ereshkigal was suppressing Gorgon at the time, so it was normal that she did not notice Kingu's location. Ereshkigal closed her eyes for a few seconds before opening them again. There is no sign of Kingu in the underworld, only a trace left behind by him. Ereshkigal was, after all, the ruler of the underworld, and it was not difficult for her to detect the creatures in the underworld. It's just as you said. Kingu abandoned Gorgon. Ereshkigal could not help but sigh. Although they were on different sides, Ereshkigal felt a little sad for Gorgon. No matter how many excuses he had, Kingu betrayed Gorgon. Betrayal was the only thing that made one's heart turn cold. This was a topic that no matter which dynasty, whether human or god, would sigh endlessly. Then Ereshkigal realized a problem. Wait. If the goddess of magical beasts is not Gorgon, but Mother, where would Mother be hiding? The Mesopotamia looked very big, but it was only a small area. The surface of the Mesopotamia was divided according to the forces, and most of the underground was occupied by Ereshkigal's underworld and Zhuge Kongming's noble phantasm. Tiamat's body was extremely huge, and it was said that her body was that of the dragon god. There was no place for her to hide. There was another important point. Tiamat was once exiled by the gods into the void, and it was not a place where one could casually come and go. If Tiamat could come out of the void, she would not have come out at the end of the gods' era. Ereshkigal's words reminded Wuming of the Persian Gulf. The dream he had about Tiamat was that he was in an ocean full of black mud. At that time, Wuming fell asleep near the Persian Gulf, and the Persian Gulf was connected to the Indian Ocean. It was easy for it to accommodate Tiamat's legendary huge body. Therefore, Tiamat was most likely hiding in the Persian Gulf. At the very least, she was hiding in the virtual space of the Persian Gulf. However, Wuming agreed with the former. Tiamat will definitely come out of the void. There is no doubt about that. Tiamat's authority was not so easy to take. If Tiamat was still in the void, even with the help of the Holy Grail, Gorgon would not be able to bless himself with Tiamat's authority. Wuming guessed that it was probably because of the collapse of human reason, coupled with Gidea's tricks, such as borrowing the power of the Holy Grail, that Tiamat successfully escaped from the void. For some unknown reason she was sleeping somewhere in this world. Kingu was either simply there to meet up with Tiamat, or he was there to awaken the sleeping Tiamat. Wuming believed that it was the former. The black mud only appeared on Gorgon's body, and it did not invade the land. This means that Tiamat definitely hasn't come to this land yet, or she is also sleeping. In this regard, Ereshkigal nodded in agreement. If Tiamat had appeared in Mesopotamia, perhaps humanity would have been finished long ago, and they would still be able to resist for half a year. As the only native god in Mesopotamia's Sumer pantheon, it could be said that no one understood Tiamat's power better than Ereshkigal. Although she wasn't like Ishtar who could freely roam the world, Ereshkigal wasn't the kind of person who didn't care about worldly affairs. Ereshkigal was indeed quite reclusive, but not to mention that the Garrula spirit would bring her news of the surface, as her divine authority, peddling, would also tell Ereshkigal stories of the surface from time to time, whether it was about humans or gods. Otherwise, if Ereshkigal had stayed in the underworld for tens of thousands of years, she wouldn't have gone crazy from boredom. At the very least, Ereshkigal wouldn't be like a young lady who lived in a boudoir like she was now. It had to be said that time could erase the soul of an intelligent creature, but it could also erase the soul of a god. It was rare for Ereshkigal, who could only stay underground and endure the curse of being imprisoned, to have the temperament of a young lady. If Ishtar and Ereshkigal were to exchange identities, perhaps Ishtar would be imprisoned for a long time and her soul would collapse and become an evil god. Of course, this was only an if. After all, Ishtar's personality was cultivated. If they were to exchange identities from the beginning, the outcome would be unpredictable. All in all, Ereshkigal was a god after all. Even if she didn't understand the affairs of the humans on the surface, she wouldn't and couldn't not understand the affairs of the gods. Gods wouldn't change for millions of years, unlike humans who would change dynasties in less than 100 years or even a dozen years. The mother has an ability called amino-geese, also known as cell coercion. It can transform the captured life forms into creatures that will completely obey the mother's orders and become the enemy of humans. This is the mother's most powerful and terrifying ability. Hearing Ereshkigal's explanation, Wuming felt that this was similar to the black root mud. This was probably why Ereshkigal could still remain calm after Gorgon admitted that the black root mud was Tiamat's authority. However, Ereshkigal didn't know that the black root mud in Gorgon's body was the black root mud. Wuming wouldn't mistake it. What was strange was that Gorgon clearly possessed the black root mud, but Gorgon said that it was Tiamat's authority. After all, Ereshkigal was a cornerstone that had been in the underworld since birth. It wasn't surprising that the black root mud Gorgon mentioned was Tiamat's authority. It could only be said that either Gorgon was lying, or Tiamat possessed the black root mud. In other words, her own authority had fused with the black root mud, which had a very similar effect. This wasn't good news. Chapter 989. After all, Wuming was not a native god of Sumer. Naturally, he did not know about Tiamat's crazy ability. But after Wuming thought of his trump card, he was relieved. After all, there was no need to panic. Wuming looked at Ereshkigal again. Move the underworld to a safe place. This way Tiamat will not endanger you. As long as the underworld was moved to the north or below the mountains, as long as the underworld was not connected to the surface, Tiamat would not affect Ereshkigal underground. However, Wuming's words made Ereshkigal unhappy. I am also on the side of humans. Don't think of me as the same as Ishtar. Hearing Ereshkigal's complaint, Wuming could not help but smile. First of all, Ereshkigal did not understand Ishtar. Ishtar would not run away at such a critical moment for the survival of humans. Probably in Ereshkigal's mind, Ishtar was the greedy goddess who was addicted to treasures and overestimated herself. Second of all, Wuming also felt gratified for Ereshkigal. Ereshkigal's words also represented that Ereshkigal had answered Wuming's question. In short, it was good that Ereshkigal had the heart. Anyway, she could not do the specific thing. After all, you can't leave the underworld. There's no doubt about that. This was a hard point. Moreover, your spirit base is now so fragile that it can be broken with a light touch. Wuming's meaning was clear. Ereshkigal could not even protect herself. How could she help others? Ereshkigal once again fell into a state of embarrassment and blushed. This was something that couldn't be helped. After all, Wuming was right. Just stay in the underworld obediently. When the surface can't hold on any longer, I'll come to you for help. At that time, you won't be able to refuse even if you want to. Wuming said jokingly. Then in a flash he appeared on top of Fanbaba. Remember to release the souls of the citizens of Kuza. Their bodies are still intact in the bottom level of the Uruk's divine tower. As for those who died in battle, they were truly dead. Even if their souls were released, they could not be resurrected. Alright, I got it. Probably no one had ever treated Ereshkigal so rudely before. This made Ereshkigal a little uncomfortable. She didn't even know how to react. But at the same time, Ereshkigal felt a little inferior to herself. Her whole face showed an "I'm very sad" atmosphere. Wuming, who was sitting on Fanbaba's back, saw Ereshkigal's expression. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Ishtar was a little childish. Then Wuming suddenly said, "You're Ishtar's sister. No matter what, you have to be more elegant than Ishtar." Elegant? Ereshkigal silently analyzed this word. While Ereshkigal was analyzing elegance, Wuming silently chanted a sentence. "With my spirit of speech, let the justice of the world appear." A golden short sword appeared in Wuming's hand. Since Ereshkigal was not confident, then he would help her. After all, he was half a disciple. Then Wuming stabbed himself with the golden short sword. Ereshkigal was so scared that she couldn't speak. Was he trying to commit suicide? But then Ereshkigal found a new problem. Why can you still use your authority in the underworld? Ereshkigal could feel that the golden short sword in Wuming's hand was a god's authority. But this was the underworld. If divinity was ineffective here, then naturally authority would be ineffective. However, Ereshkigal immediately realized a problem. Since Wuming could use his divine authority, Didn't that mean that Wu Ming could take her down when they first met? After all, in terms of divinity, Ereshkigal could only be considered a mid-tier god. Wu Ming was a foreign god that even the God King had to respect. There was no doubt that he could take her down. At that moment, Ereshkigal's face turned red. It was a pity that she had pretended to be the goddess of fear to scare him. In the end, he didn't mind at all. He didn't give her face as the queen of the underworld. Seeing Ereshkigal's face turn red, Wu Ming guessed Ereshkigal's thoughts. He shook his head indifferently. It was just a girl's temperament. There was no need to care. In the next second, the golden short sword that pierced Wu Ming's body disappeared. A ball of light appeared at the spot where the golden short sword pierced. This is for you. I don't really need it. With that, Wu Ming threw the ball of light to Ereshkigal. Then Wu Ming opened a huge portal. Fanbaba understood and jumped in directly. Ereshkigal, who subconsciously caught the ball of light, hugged it with both hands. It could be said that Ereshkigal was still sitting on the ground at this moment. If Ereshkigal was standing, she would definitely stagger a few steps when she caught the ball of light. Ereshkigal looked up in Wu Ming's direction. There was only a portal that had shrunk to the size of a fist left. Then Ereshkigal looked down at the ball of light in her arms. With this look, Ereshkigal suddenly found something wrong. This is divinity? Ereshkigal immediately panicked. Wu Ming had given his divinity as the Hyunryong to Ereshkigal. The golden short sword could cut the enemy's power. Naturally, it could also cut Wu Ming's own. Wu Ming had used the golden short sword to cut his own divinity. Just as Wu Ming had said, Wu Ming had no use for this thing. His own power did not come from the divinity that was added by the legend of the Hyunryong. Therefore, to Wu Ming, this divinity did not matter to him. Ereshkigal's divinity had almost completely disappeared. The spirit base was only hanging on by a thread because of the underworld. It was obvious that Ereshkigal needed this more than Wu Ming. Divinity can be given away? Ereshkigal was stunned. She had never heard of a god giving away their own divinity. Could it be that Wu Ming's power had been weakened? Ereshkigal, who did not know what was going on, could not help but frown. She was not going to use it. She was going to find a chance to return it to Wu Ming. It was fine if she could not help him, but how could she drag him down? However, in the next second, the divinity that belonged to the Hyunryong slid into Ereshkigal's body. Suddenly, Ereshkigal was surrounded by a golden light. Chapter 990. Ereshkigal was confused once again. However, there was something else that made Ereshkigal even more confused. Beside Ereshkigal, there was a black-haired little girl wearing a robe and holding a staff. The little girl looked at Ereshkigal and Ereshkigal looked at the little girl. The two of them stared at each other. Brother Wu Ming? The little girl looked at Ereshkigal with a tone of speculation, disbelief, and suspicion. Brother Wu Ming? Ereshkigal repeated the little girl's words, and showed an even more surprised expression. Who is Brother Wu Ming? On the surface of Mesopotamia, in a dense forest far away from the underworld, a huge black-purple ripple appeared here, and then a huge green creature walked out, and there was an extraordinary figure sitting on its back. The two of them were Fanbaba and Wu Ming, who left through the portal. And this dense forest was Quizzard's territory. Wu Ming snapped his fingers and closed the portal. Even the rules of the underworld could not restrict Wu Ming, so the underworld naturally could not restrict Wu Ming. Ereshkigal is really an interesting person. It's a pity that I can't stay for a while longer. Wu Ming recalled Ereshkigal's shocked expression, and his face was filled with joy. Wu, Fanbaba called out twice, and it seemed like it did not understand Wu Ming's words. Wu Ming laughed and then shook his head. It was normal for Fanbaba not to understand Wu Ming's joy, and Ereshkigal might not understand Wu Ming's meaning. But then Wu Ming could not laugh anymore. This was because Wu Ming felt an unusually large magical power coming from the east. That's the Persian Gulf. In an instant, Wu Ming guessed the source of such a large magical power. It's Tiamat, right? Gorgon's possession of Tiamat's power was not a simple possession, but a sharing. Only a shared death could make Tiamat immediately wake up, or rather, wake up. This was probably Kinga's goal. Kinga wanted Tiamat to appear, and Wu Ming wanted to end this singularity as soon as possible. I have to hurry. Although Silent Wonder had never seen Tiamat before and did not know how powerful she was, Silent Wonder would not underestimate her. Before Wu Ming's trump card was ready, he had to make some preparations to deal with Tiamat. Wu Ming thought as he released his mental power. After determining his current location, he retracted his mental power. Wu Ming found himself in the northwest part of the forest. This was the place where Wu Ming and Merlin met up on their way to Eridu. This could not be helped. Funbaba was too large to appear in the city, and Wuming had only stayed in this forest other than Eric Metropolis and UR. I wonder if the demonic beasts here have been eliminated. Wuming thought. Then Wuming pointed in the direction of Eridu to Funbaba. Let's go, we'll head there. Heading towards Eridu, they would know the situation. Woo woo woo, Funbaba cried out again and then ran in the direction Wuming pointed. Funbaba was obviously a huge existence, but it was like a fish in water. It did not knock down any trees in this forest. This was probably the talent of Funbaba as a forest beast. On the way, Wuming and Funbaba took advantage of this short idle time to chat. After all, even if the situation was critical, it was useless to be anxious. It was better to temporarily pin the hope of stopping Tiamat on Gilgamesh, while Wuming went to the battlefield in the forest to meet up with Gadotsi. Speaking of which, why did you run to my temple? I left you behind to help them, but you ended up sleeping in my temple. Although Funbaba looked bloated, it was probably due to the pressure from Tiamat. At this moment, Funbaba's speed was not slow at all. The rapid airflow flowed past Wuming's face. If it was an ordinary person, they might have suffocated. However, no matter how fast the airflow was, Wuming's words fell into Funbaba's ears. Woo woo woo, so that's how it is. It's not used to being away from Yggdrasil, so it fell asleep. This was something that Wuming did not expect. After all, Funbaba was a mythological beast and not a life in Yggdrasil. In Wuming's opinion, even if Funbaba was separated from Yggdrasil, it would not be a big problem. However, who would have thought that Funbaba had been fused with Yggdrasil for a long time, and the sudden separation would have a mental impact on Funbaba? Fortunately, the impact was not big. Then you come back first. Wuming said, opened the dragon nest space and took out Yggdrasil. Wuming did not mean to let Funbaba return to Yggdrasil. Wuming meant to let Yggdrasil integrate into Funbaba's body. The two had already formed a symbiotic relationship, and it was not a problem at all who was in whose body. Wuming held Yggdrasil in a reverse grip and stabbed Yggdrasil into Funbaba's body that was full of green hair, but there was no bloody scene. The moment Yggdrasil came into contact with Funbaba, it turned into energy from the spearhead and integrated into Funbaba's body bit by bit. After Funbaba accepted Yggdrasil, it seemed to have strengthened a lot, and its speed became faster. Stop. Suddenly Wuming made Funbaba stop. The reason why Wuming suddenly stopped was that Wuming smelled blood, and it was the blood of a demonic beast. The blood of a demonic beast was not the same as human blood, so it had a different smell from human blood. Wuming could naturally smell it in an instant. As for Funbaba, whose sense of smell was more sensitive than Wuming's, it had already smelled the scent of a demonic beast, but they were all dead, so Funbaba did not report it to Wuming. Wuming closed his eyes and spread out his mental strength. In an instant, the nearby scene appeared in his mind. On the side of Wuming, a large number of trees had collapsed and were destroyed. One after another, demonic beast corpses were lying among the destroyed trees. A large amount of purple blood stained the ground and the destroyed trees. Not only that, but even the surrounding intact woods also had demonic beast corpses. And in the center of the collapsed area, a huge red demonic beast was lying there, its head separated from its body. Most of the purple blood in this area was actually provided by this huge demonic beast. Demonic beast commander? Wuming frowned. The size of an ordinary demonic beast could not reach that level. Only a demonic beast commander could explain this. Judging from the death of the demonic beast commander, Gadotsi and the others must have won. Chapter 991. Gadotsi and the others had most likely returned to Eric Metropolis, but he didn't know how many casualties there were. However, Wuming couldn't go to Eric Metropolis right now. Wait for me here. Wu Ming exhorted and leaped into the air above the forest, heading towards the battlefield. Funbaba, who nodded to indicate understood, found a relatively large rock, climbed up and rested. In the blink of an eye, Wuming arrived at the battlefield. Wuming frowned when he sensed the demonic beast commander through his mental power. It was because Wuming found a trace of abnormality in the wound of the demonic beast commander. It was because of this abnormality that Wuming didn't choose to go to Eric Metropolis directly. Wuming didn't care about the other demonic beasts and went straight to the corpse of the demonic beast commander. After inspecting the monster's corpse, Silent Cry found that there was a trace of death aura around the wound on its head. This aura was very similar to the aura of the underworld. Wuming, who had just left the underworld, wouldn't be mistaken. Immediately, Wuming made a judgment. This demonic beast commander was beheaded with a single slash. And to be able to behead it with a single slash and have a trace of death aura in the wound, only that guy could do it. The old man of the mountain, Hassan Sabah. Although there were many Hassans, the one Wu Ming was referring to was none other than the first Hassan, who was qualified to be an assassin. Wu Ming was the one who took a slash from that guy. It was normal for him to be able to easily recognize that the slash came from the first Hassan. No, it should be said that no matter who was slashed by the first Hassan, they would remember it. Since he's already here, I can finally relax. Although he was exaggerating the first Hassan was no ordinary person. In terms of assassination, Wu Ming did not dare to underestimate him. With the addition of Merlin, Gilgamesh, Zhuge Kong Ming and Chaldea's Roman, these four think tanks, Wu Ming didn't have to worry as much. Let's go straight to Edo. Since Gadatsi and the rest were not here, Wu Ming did not need to continue using Fanbaba. After Wu Ming finished speaking, he opened a teleportation gate and walked in. At the same time, a huge portal suddenly appeared under Fanbaba, who was resting on a rock. Caught off guard, Fanbaba fell into it. Woo woo woo. The portal suddenly closed and Fanbaba's frightened cry echoed in the forest. Near Eric Metropolis in the Feathered Serpent Temple. Two portals, one big and one small, opened. Wu Ming walked out of the small portal, while Fanbaba fell out of the horizontal portal. Dong! Fanbaba fell to the ground with a loud bang. The citizens of Eric Metropolis thought it was an earthquake. Woo woo woo, Fanbaba lay on the ground and cried out. Its head rubbed against Wu Ming as if it was in pain. However, others did not understand Fanbaba, but Wu Ming did. Fanbaba was not hurt at all. It was just frightened and acted spoiled to Wu Ming. Okay, I apologize. I'm sorry, Fanbaba. Wu Ming didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he stroked Fanbaba's head and apologized in a funny tone. However, it was really useful. Fanbaba immediately stood up, giving people the feeling that it had completely recovered. Whoa? Isn't this Lord Hyunryong? At this time, the leopard man suddenly appeared from a haystack and looked at Wu Ming and Fanbaba with a silly expression. Wu Ming was not surprised that the leopard man came to greet him. Fanbaba's fall from the portal to the ground made a lot of noise. As a leopard man who has an intuition beyond that of a beast, it is impossible for him not to discover it. In addition, the leopard man is lively and active. It must be her who came to greet Wu Ming and Fanbaba. Leopard man, is Tachika Fujimaru still here? Without talking nonsense with the leopard man, Wu Ming asked concisely. She has already left, she went east. The leopard man pointed to the east, and there was a trace of seriousness in his seemingly silly eyes. It seems that the leopard man's intuition also detected the danger. Where is Quizzard? Wu Ming didn't believe that Quizzard couldn't detect the movement caused by Tiamat. Quizzard Coyotl just left, she went to find Tachika Fujimaru. A familiar light voice came from the other side of Wu Ming. Wu Ming turned his head and saw that it was indeed Anna. But the difference is that Anna seems to have something on her hand this time. Her body is wrapped with something similar to a bandage. Not only that, but Anna's hood is not worn. Cooker is worried about Tachika Fujimaru, so he rushed over to help. Ignoring the leopard man, Wu Ming walked to Anna. Anna, are you okay? Faced with Wu Ming's concern, Anna shook her head. I accidentally suffered a minor injury when dealing with Uxiu Mughar, and I have almost recovered. Uxiu Mughar? It's probably the name of the magical beast commander who was beheaded. And the reason why Anna stayed here is probably to recuperate. Then Anna continued to speak. Merlin asked me to wait for you here. He said it's very urgent and he hopes you can make a judgment based on this. Anna said while taking out a clay tablet from under her cloak. So that's how it is. Not only is she recuperating, but she also works as a messenger. Wu Ming took it and found that the clay tablet was empty. Not only that, but it was also covered with a powerful illusion. If you forcibly look at it, you will fall into an illusion. Merlin, this guy. Wu Ming was a little speechless. This is simply superfluous. Merlin always likes to work on such meaningless things. A few Lune runes were inputted into the clay tablet by Wu Ming as if entering a password. The illusion suddenly disappeared, and the clay tablet was still empty. But then, some words directly appeared in Wu Ming's mind, and Wu Ming also subconsciously closed his eyes. In the next second, the clay tablet in Wu Ming's hand directly turned into yellow soil and scattered. Anna didn't say anything and quietly waited for Wu Ming to digest it. On the other hand, the leopard man and Fanbaba foolishly mixed together. In an instant, Wu Ming opened his eyes. Let's go back to Uruk. This was Wu Ming's judgment. Anna nodded silently. In any case, Merlin told her to listen to Wu Ming's words. Although Anna didn't want to listen to Merlin, after all, Wu Ming was a reliable person, so Anna could only make do with it. Hearing Wu Ming's words, Fanbaba also kicked the leopard man away and ran to Wu Ming's side, fully showing that she was on call. Good. Then I will also go to Uruk. The leopard man put his hands on his hips, showing an inexplicable sense of pride. Wu Ming looked at the leopard man with disdain, but Wu Ming still decided to bring the leopard man. In any case, she was still a goddess. Even if she wasn't as good as Quizzard and Ishtar, she would still play a role, right? However, at this moment, Wu Ming suddenly noticed that a large amount of magic that made Wu Ming feel disgusted was moving toward Eric Metropolis. Wu Ming had a bad feeling. Chapter 992. Quizzard's shrine wasn't in Eric Metropolis, but next to Eric Metropolis. Wu Ming decided to go to Eric Metropolis to take a look. After all, the magic power made Wu Ming feel uneasy. If Wu Ming, the leopard man, and Anna left just like that, the citizens of Eric Metropolis might be in danger. Wu Ming turned to look at the leopard man, who had the sharpest senses. At this moment, the leopard man narrowed his eyes and looked in the direction of Eric Metropolis. It seemed that the leopard man had also noticed the disgusting magic power. Let's go to Eric Metropolis first. Eric Metropolis. The citizens of Eric Metropolis were living their lives day after day. Although they were living in fear for a short period of time because of Quizzard, Eric Metropolis had returned to its previous daily life because of Wu Ming pulling the feathered serpent god into his group. As the saying goes, those who rely on the mountain live off the mountain, and those who rely on the river live off the water. After all, there were changes in the surroundings of Eric Metropolis. With the consent of Quizzard, the people would enter the jungle from time to collect some items for their daily life. After all, this jungle was moved by Quizzard based on the jungle in South America. There were plenty of resources, whether it was water, fruit trees, or herbs, they were all abundant. However, because the trees were full of water, they weren't suitable for firewood. But the former was enough for Eric Metropolis. In addition, the jungle would drive away the magic beasts, and the leopard man and his subordinates would occasionally help to collect. The citizens of Eric Metropolis were living a good life. As usual, the citizens of Eric Metropolis returned to Eric Metropolis after collecting the resources from the jungle. But the difference was that when they returned, someone greeted them at the entrance of the city. Thank you for your hard work, everyone. Let's take a rest here. The person who spoke was a seemingly noble woman who was dressed elegantly and wore a veil. Even with the veil covering her face, the woman's beauty was obvious. However, no one was captivated by the woman because her status made them subconsciously respect her. Lady Siduri, thank you for waiting for us here. A person who seemed to be a leader replied to Siduri with incomparable respect. This woman was Siduri, who had rushed over from Uruk with Gadatsi and the others. For some reason, Siduri was left behind. When she heard that the people who went out were about to return, Siduri volunteered to wait at the entrance of the city. Siduri didn't know what she should do. Because of Hyunryong's identity as the chief priest, the citizens of Eric Metropolis respected her very much. They didn't let her do any dirty work. More importantly, the living habits of Eric Metropolis had changed because of the jungle. Siduri, who didn't know about this at all, couldn't force herself to do any work. She might even be more of a hindrance. That was why Siduri was waiting at the entrance of the city to welcome the people who returned. She could only play a role in this aspect for now. The people sat down in the open space to rest for a while, and Siduri looked at the resources that the people had collected. It seems like we didn't get much this time. Even though Siduri hadn't seen what the previous harvests were like, Siduri could tell at a glance that they didn't get much this time. After all, the amount this time was pitiful. The people only had a few jars of water and some fruits with them. That was all. The resources around here are almost all collected. Lord Leopard Man and the others lost some of their men to fight the monsters. There are many things that we can't collect by ourselves. Although they didn't get much, the leader's face was full of gratitude and guilt. Not only the leader but the others were also the same. They were not uncivilized people. They were protected by the forest and the gods, and they were able to obtain resources that they had never seen before. The most important thing was that they were able to survive in this land that was filled with magical beasts. Just this last point alone was enough to satisfy them. That was why they were so grateful. As for the guilt, it was because many of the orcs under Leopard Man died in the battle with the monsters. After all, they were fighting the monsters for Eric Metropolis, so it was natural for them to feel guilty. Alright, it's all in the past. Organize the resources and go back to see your families. Yes, Lord Siduri. Siduri was like an angel. The fatigue of the people who went out to collect resources was instantly cleared away. However, at this moment, a clacking sound suddenly came from the dense forest behind them. Everyone turned their heads to look. They really couldn't imagine what could make such a strange sound. It couldn't be a monster or an animal because such a sound couldn't be made by living creatures. The trees in the jungle began to shake and the bushes rustled. A brave citizen of Eric Metropolis walked over with a knife in his hand. He was about to check it out when he arrived in front of the bushes. But in the next second, a pitch-black cone-like object suddenly pierced the man's chest. In an instant, the man's chest was pierced and blood spurted out. Then the thing that pierced the man's chest walked out. Everyone present was shocked. What kind of strange thing was this? A pitch-black creature with arthropods appeared in front of them. Its head did not have any facial features, only a slanted mouth. A large red snake head dangled out of its mouth in an extremely disgusting manner. Its mouth full of neat white teeth did not make people feel at ease, and together with its pitch-black body, it made people feel extremely disgusted. The humanoid body under its head was rather weak and delicate, and its legs had degenerated into two thin lines. It looked like it had completely lost the ability to walk. On the other hand, the monster had 4 arms that resembled appendages. 3 of the 4 arthropods with sharp ends were scattered in 3 directions as support for the weak body. The 4th arthropod held the man whose chest was pierced. Blood flowed all over the ground in the blink of an eye. The people who were struggling before were basically motionless now. Some words that people couldn't understand came out from the mouth of this strange thing that they had never seen before. Everyone who heard it felt uncomfortable. Coupled with the appearance of this unknown thing, it was a complete visual pollution. There was no doubt that the demonic beasts were wreaking havoc on this land. Although the people of Ailadu were protected, it was precisely because of this that they had nowhere to vent their frustrations unless they went to the battlefield. Their nerves were now extremely sensitive and tense. And now their tense nerves seemed to have been cut by this visual pollution. Many people felt despair, fear, and terror in their hearts. And in the next second, this fear intensified. Chapter 993. The corpse of the impaled citizen slid off the forelimb of the unknown creature. However, in the next second, a monster that looked exactly like the unknown creature broke out of the cocoon and absorbed the corpse along the way. What is this? The scene before them made many feel despair towards this monster that was full of mental corruption. Out of fear, the weapons in their hands fell to the ground. Siduri looked uneasy. It was too late to retreat and seek help from the Quetzalcoatl god and the leopard man. Moreover, it was not just these 2 creatures. More and more unknown creatures walked out of the dense forest in front of them. There were hundreds of them. Now, everyone understood where the clacking sound came from. It was the footsteps of these unknown creatures. Everyone was stunned by the scene before them. The unknown creatures did not move. They just looked at them like a cat looking at a mouse. "We're done for, run." It was unknown who said this, but surprisingly this sentence caused everyone to react and run towards the city behind them. The dark unknown creatures moved as well. They were like cats that saw the mouse moving and were ready to hunt it down. Everyone hurried to the Quetzalcoatl god's temple. Siduri did not move. Instead, she shouted loudly. She told everyone to stay calm when they lost their cool. Then Siduri rushed towards the monsters. At least we have to buy some time. There was one thing that Siduri knew very well. There was no time to escape. Against so many dark monsters, the Quizzard god and the leopard man would not be able to save them. If that's the case, let me buy some time. Even if it's just for a second. This was Siduri's thought. In this situation where the chances of survival were extremely low, Siduri hoped that she could be the cornerstone to buy some time for others to live. ZZLWDTL. The monsters spoke in a language that the humans could not understand. They split into 2 groups. Some of them surrounded Siduri, the weak human who had rushed over, while the others chased after the people who were running away. NWSMBTZ? NWSMBTZ? The monsters surrounded Siduri, as if they were questioning her why she did not run away. They kept repeating the same sentence. Siduri could not understand the language of these monsters. She could only suppress her trembling body, clasped her hands in front of her chest, closed her eyes and prayed. Lord Hyunryong, K. JTBCWMDTL? Chaos. JTBCWMDTL? The monsters raised their sharp forelimbs as if they were performing some kind of ritual, and collectively stabbed their forelimbs at Siduri. However, the pain did not reach Siduri's body. Instead, the sound of the weapon piercing into the flesh reached Siduri's ears. Puchi, Puchi, Puchi. Siduri boldly opened her eyes. The pitch-black monsters around her were all paralyzed on the ground. There were weapons pierced through their bodies. Purple blood flowed out from the bodies of these dead monsters. King Gilgamesh? This scene was very similar to Gilgamesh's style. After all, in Siduri's memory, only Gilgamesh, who had the Gate of Babylon, could do this. Unfortunately, Gil did not come. A familiar voice entered Siduri's ears. Siduri could not help but raise her head, and then she saw Wu Ming attached to the air. Lord Hyunryong? Wu Ming waved his hand, and the weapons that killed the pitch-black monsters all flew into the illusory grids that appeared one after another behind Wu Ming, and the bodies of the dead monsters also turned into dust and dissipated. Siduri finally understood that those weapons were released from the grids behind Wu Ming. This was the same method as Gilgamesh. As expected of a master and disciple. Siduri thought so. That's right. Lord Hyunryong, there are still some monsters heading towards Eric Metropolis? Siduri immediately reacted and looked at Wu Ming pleadingly. Don't worry, Fanbaba, Leopard Man, and Anna are all in the city. These things won't cause any trouble. Just Fanbaba alone was able to annihilate these unknown monsters without any casualties. Their physical strength wasn't that high and they had no idea what they were. Wu Ming jumped down from the air and grabbed a handful of dust that disappeared from the monsters in his hand. This is God's clay? Enkidu's body was made of God's clay, so there was no reason why Wu Ming could not recognize God's clay. God's clay? Siduri could not help but be shocked. Siduri naturally knew that Enkidu was made of God's clay. However, she really did not expect these murderous monsters to be of the same origin as Enkidu. Looks like this is Tiamat's doing. Wu Ming really could not think of anyone else who could create such monsters, other than Tiamat. Siduri, immediately go into the city and find Fanbaba. Ask Fanbaba to surround the entire Eric metropolis with vines to prevent such monsters from appearing again. Also, help me tell Leopard Man and Anna to temporarily stay in Eric metropolis as a precaution. Siduri was worthy of being Gilgamesh's assistant. After hearing Wu Ming's task, her trembling body immediately stopped. Yes, Lord Hyunryong, I will go tell them now. Siduri immediately ran towards the city, but just as she moved, Siduri stopped again. Lord Hyunryong, what are you going to do? Siduri was not a fool. Since Wu Ming asked her to inform Fanbaba and the others, it meant that Wu Ming had something to do and had to leave. Wu Ming turned to look at Siduri and said concisely, I'm going to Ur City to take a look. Ur City and Eric Metropolis were the only two cities left in the jungle. It did not mean that the people in the other cities in the jungle had died. These people had gathered in Ur City and Eric Metropolis and were protected by Quizzard's reign of terror. It was not until Wu Ming roped in Quizzard that the two cities returned to normal. Moreover, Ur City and Eric Metropolis were cities not far from the Persian Gulf. If these monsters all landed in the Persian Gulf where Tiamat was, the monsters may have also attacked Ur City. Wu Ming, who had been to Ur City, directly came to the entrance of Ur City with a portal. Wu Ming used his telekinesis to fly into the air and overlooked Ur City. It could only be said that as Wu Ming expected, the dark monsters in the city had begun to hunt humans. Wu Ming even saw two humans fighting in the encirclement of monsters. Obviously, these monsters were holding a game with simple rules but extremely disgusting. Chapter 994. Letting two people duel and telling them that only one of them could survive. Otherwise both of them would die. The former's promise and the latter's threat allowed both parties to duel without any qualms. This could be said to be a vivid depiction of the ugliness of human nature. To be honest, Wu Ming hated this kind of game. There were only two outcomes to this kind of game. Either the victor would survive or there would be no survivors. Obviously, the game of these monsters was the latter. The victor would also be killed. The winner, who had already killed his opponent before Wu Ming arrived, sat on the ground, paralyzed. After he recovered, he stood up and looked at the monsters around him with excitement. At this moment he felt the joy of being able to live in his heart. However, the monsters around him surrounded him and raised their forelimbs, ready to kill the winner. What? I won? I listened to you and killed him. Ah. The victor let out a voice that fell from the peak of hope into the valley of despair. His face was crumbling. Obviously, these monsters let two people duel for the sake of pleasure. They would not let anyone go. It had to be said that this was very suitable for the monsters. Only monsters could have such twisted pleasure that it made people want to vomit. The meaningless killing instantly made Wu Ming furious. With a furious expression, Wu Ming waved his hand. Countless chains extended from Wu Ming's sleeves. The sharp chains flew towards the monsters in Wu Ming's sight. Poochie, 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 poochie. In an instant the sound of weapons piercing through flesh could be heard. All the monsters in Silent Cry's line of sight were pierced through by the heavenly lock, which was the weak point of most creatures. These monsters turned into ashes and dissipated. Sir Hyun-ryong. Seeing that Wu Ming had saved his life, the winner immediately knelt down and thanked Wu Ming. Not only him, many people in UR City who were about to be killed were also saved by Wu Ming. They all knelt on the ground, praying and thanking Wu Ming sincerely. However, Wu Ming was not in a good mood at the moment. When he flew over the head of the winner, Wu Ming used magic power to transmit a message to him. You will live the rest of your life in guilt and atonement until you die. These curse-like words lingered in the ears of the victor, causing him to tremble with fear. The winner suddenly raised his head, but Wu Ming had already disappeared. Only the winner was left sitting in the same place with a look of horror and guilt. In the shadows of UR City, Wu Ming strolled over. Wu Ming did not blame the winner for killing his opponent in order to survive. After all, any smart person would know that there was nothing he could do about it. But even though there was nothing he could do about it, Wu Ming's curse-like words to the winner was the price he deserved. Also, Wu Ming didn't come for a stroll in the shadows because he was annoyed. He came to kill the monsters that were hidden. As for how to find these monsters, it was not difficult for Wu Ming to release his mental power to cover the entire UR City. The monsters had a unique magic power that allowed Wu Ming to find them easily. A few monsters that were lucky enough to escape Wu Ming's sight and were not killed by the Heaven Lock charged out from the shadows, raising their two sharp forelimbs to stab at Wu Ming. But in the next second, the Heaven Lock that appeared from the golden ripples around Wu Ming pierced through their bodies from top to bottom. A few monsters turned into ashes. One of the monsters that was not completely dead struggled and tried to extend its forelimbs to Wu Ming, and to Wu Ming's surprise it said, "You are also the child of your mother, why are you helping humans?" But in the next second, it turned into ashes and disappeared with the wind. The child of my mother. Wu Ming frowned. That's right, Wu Ming could understand the words of these monsters. He could understand the words that sounded like the whispers of the ancient gods. That was why Wu Ming was surprised. And the words of the monster just now reminded Wu Ming of the first magical beast commander he met, Ulidim. At that time he also said that Wu Ming was the child of Tiamat. However, Wu Ming was sure that he had nothing to do with Tiamat. It's probably because the later generations fabricated that Hyun-ryong and Tiamat are related. Wu Ming recalled what Roman had said when he introduced Hyun-ryong to Gadatsi. And Wu Ming had seen gods bound by myths before. The gods of the God Slayer world were the best example. It was probably because the mysterious Hyun-ryong was believed by the later generations to be the son of Tiamat, that Wu Ming's identity as Hyun-ryong was believed to be Tiamat's son by the magical beasts. Boring. Wu Ming could only give this sentence. Who would want to be brothers with magical beasts? Moreover, these monsters might also be Tiamat's children. Coupled with the game of the monsters just now, Wu Ming felt disgusted at the thought of being brothers with these monsters. Wu Ming used his open mental power to explore UR City. After confirming that all these monsters were killed, Wu Ming withdrew his mental power and used the connection between Wu Ming and Yggdrasil to inform Fanbaba to come to UR City after building the protective shield of Eric Metropolis. Then Wu Ming opened the portal and walked directly in. At the gate of the Hyun-ryong shrine outside Uruk, black-purple ripples appeared, and Wu Ming walked out. I haven't been here for a long time. Looking at the gate of the shrine, Wu Ming sighed. But now was not the time to sigh. Wu Ming suddenly released his mental power and instantly enveloped the whole place. Just as Wu Ming expected, there were indeed sporadic monsters appearing in Uruk. Not only that, but there were also a few ugly magical beasts with wings that Wu Ming had never seen before. They were probably the winged mermaid Kururu. Although the number of Kururu and monsters was small, without a servant, they were no match for these two creatures that they had never seen before. And the monsters also had the ability to turn the people they killed into monsters. If they were given enough time, perhaps the whole Uruk would fall. I don't know how Baby and Gadatsi are doing. There were still a lot of magical beasts on Baby's side. Leonidas and the others couldn't spare any time. Since Gadatsi and the others weren't in the city, There was no doubt that they must have met up with Ishtar near the Persian Gulf. I have to hurry up. As for what time to hurry up, naturally it was the time to release the backup. Chapter 995. Wu Ming retracted his mental strength and walked straight into the temple without a door. He came to the Hyunryong statue. The Hyunryong temple was indeed abandoned. This was an undeniable fact. However, when Wu Ming returned to the Uruk last time, he did something to the temple just in case. Wu Ming's spiritual base left a barrier in the temple statue that was comparable to a precious artifact. No, it should be called a precious artifact barrier in the god's generation. Wu Ming floated up and pressed one hand on the head of the Hyunryong statue while chanting. The gods will eventually retreat, and the mythological era will inevitably come to an end. An ethereal voice that contained magic came from Wu Ming's mouth. Along with these words that were filled with magic, the Hyunryong statue emitted light like a piece of shining jade. Those who have been enlightened need not be guided. Only the protection of the end, like a firefly burning. The light of the unpolished jade turned into specks of fireflies and dispersed into the air. My God, restore, bless the world with this body. In an instant, the Hyunryong statue was completely shattered. The shattered statue turned into specks of light, and along with the powerful magic that was released when it was shattered, they dispersed in all directions. They passed through the temple's walls and floated into the air. If someone took a closer look, they would realize that these specks of light that contained a powerful magic that passed through the temple floated above the Uruk. This was indeed the case. In the next second, a light film suddenly appeared above the Uruk and enveloped the entire Uruk in the form of a protective shield. The moment the Uruk was enveloped by the light film, a large number of specks of light scattered everywhere in the Uruk like phosphor powder. The monsters and Kururu in the light film all exploded and died the moment they came into contact with the phosphor powder. However, the humans were not affected at all. Roar! A dragon's roar came from the sky, and the shadow of a huge dragon appeared on the light film. It was Wu Ming's dragon-shaped shadow. It's Hyunryong-sama? Hyunryong-sama has blessed us. Hyunryong-sama? Thank you, Hyunryong-sama? For a moment, the Uruk citizens knelt on the ground and prayed to the shadow on the light film in the sky. In the central tower of the Uruk, Gilgamesh, who saw this scene, was relieved. Well done. As expected of you, Hyunryong, Gilgamesh praised Wu Ming without hesitation. As for Wu Ming's seat, he used a teleport portal next to King's seat. However, Wu Ming did not have the slightest bit of pride. Instead, he shook his head. I prepared it just in case. I hope that I will never have to use it. After all, if he did not use it, it meant that the Uruk was fine. If he used it, it meant that the Uruk was threatened. Wu Ming hoped that the latter would not come. However, things did not go as he wished. Wu Ming had no choice but to use the noble phantasm. At that moment, Gilgamesh no longer commented on this matter. Instead, he changed the topic. What do you think about the awakened Tiamat? He put aside the clay tablet in his hand. There was no need to deal with government affairs now. Then, Gilgamesh pointed to the seat on the left and motioned for Wu Ming to sit down. I have a trump card to deal with Tiamat, but I still need some time. Wu Ming sat down and said, the northern wall is still under attack from the demonic beasts. General Leonidas and the military counselor can't get away for a while. Otherwise, it would be best to let the military counselor stall for time. Zhuge Kongming was famous for his defense. It would be foolproof to let him make a plan to stall for time. However, Chaldea is also a good candidate. You can discuss with them. This king can only be used to command the soldiers to repair Nabistin's tooth. Gilgamesh, who had sealed most of his noble phantasms when he became the sage king, did not have much combat power. The strength of the old Gilgamesh and the young Gilgamesh were worlds apart. However, in terms of non-combat, Gilgamesh did a good job. For example, he created Nabistin's tooth. Because of Zhuge Kongming, the incomplete Nabistin's tooth was successfully developed 3 months ago. It was installed in the southwest of Uruk as a defensive device. However, what was interesting was that Nabistin's tooth was basically useless. The monsters rode on the winged Kururu and easily crossed Nabistin's tooth. Although Ishtar and Gadatsi were there to stop them, some of them still arrived in Uruk alone. If Wu Ming did not use the one-time noble phantasm sealed in the Hyunryong statue to protect the Uruk, Gilgamesh would have to deal with those demonic beasts himself. Speaking of which, what are those monsters? Their bodies are made of God's clay. Gilgamesh's pupils shrank when he heard Wu Ming's words. Obviously, Gilgamesh had no idea what they were. Roman from Chaldea should know what they are, but the people from Chaldea and Ishtar are fighting the monsters and the Kururu in the southwest Persian Gulf. Even Merlin is there. However, this king doesn't have the means to contact them, so he can't contact them at the moment. Gilgamesh had another layer of meaning. He did not know much about the current situation, so he could not say much. However, Tiamat's awakening is beyond this king's expectation. Gilgamesh used his clairvoyance to see the future, but Gilgamesh saw those things in his dreams. After he sealed those things on the destiny tablet, Gilgamesh forgot what he saw. This was normal for humans. When a person woke up, he could only remember the dream for a short time. Once he was completely awake, the dream would be forgotten. The most reliable way was to record it on the spot. However, since he recorded it on the destiny tablet when he was half awake, it was reasonable for Gilgamesh to forget where the tablet was. Due to the tense situation, the tablet was not found at all. However, it did not matter if it was not found. After all, the enemy now was Tiamat. The Holy Grail is not with Gorgon either. It is most likely with Kingu or Tiamat. Wuming did not see any trace of the Holy Grail when he killed Gorgon. In addition, Kingu easily abandoned Gorgon. It was obvious that the Holy Grail was not with Gorgon. Kingu? Hahahang, you mean the imposter who is using Enkidu's body? That is a logical name. The reason Gilgamesh laughed was simple. Gilgamesh obviously did not think that the person was Tiamat's son, Kingu. Chapter 996. If it was an ancient god like Kingu, there was no need for him to take over Enkidu's body. This would lower his own status, so that Kingu must be an imposter as well. But Kingu was Tiamat's son, which was quite fitting for the imposter Enkidu. Speaking of which, Merlin told me something through the stone tablet. Oh, Gilgamesh showed an interested expression. It was obvious that Merlin was also hiding something from Gilgamesh. Merlin cast an illusion on Tiamat when he was in the Utopia, and kept Tiamat in a state of deep sleep, which led to Gorgon's appearance. Wuming told Gilgamesh about the letter Merlin wrote that he obtained from Anna. Kingu used the Holy Grail to connect Tiamat's 100-beast embryo authority to Gorgon's body, so that Gorgon could use the 100-beast embryo authority that was still in Tiamat's body, and through Gorgon's death, he could affect Tiamat and cause her to wake up from the illusion. For the record, this was something that Merlin discovered later. When Wuming used force to injure Tiamat's transformed Gorgon and caused Gorgon to return to normal, Tiamat woke up for a short while, but she immediately fell into a deep sleep. But even though it was only for a short while, it still caused serious injuries to Merlin. But because Tiamat did not wake up, Merlin did not suffer any fatal injuries. In other words, Gorgon's exit caused Tiamat to wake up. Gilgamesh did not blame Wuming. After all, Gorgon was an existence that had to be defeated, and Tiamat waking up was just a matter of time. Actually, I had a rough guess. I wanted to keep Gorgon and wait until I had prepared my trump card before attacking Gorgon, but Gorgon's state was really strange. I was afraid that something would happen if I delayed it too long, so I let Gorgon leave. Gilgamesh nodded and did not blame Wuming. In addition to Gorgon's mental state being abnormal, there was another important reason. Gorgon had already fought his way to the North Wall, and Gorgon couldn't possibly break through the wall. Furthermore, knowing that the enemy was Goddess Tiamat was not without its benefits. At the very least, he knew that defeating Goddess Tiamat would save the singularity. By the way, is Siduri still with the feathered serpent god? Gilgamesh suddenly asked. Wuming could not help but look at Gilgamesh. Why would he ask about Siduri at a time like this? This was obviously a personal matter, and it was unlikely that Gilgamesh would ask about it. But Wuming thought of Gilgamesh's clairvoyance. If Wuming did not arrive in time, Siduri would have undoubtedly been killed and assimilated into the monster. Wuming happened to see the monster being born from the body of the killed villager when he arrived, and he had to admit that it was quite disgusting, both psychologically and physically. Gilgamesh probably saw something bad in the future. But, it was scary but not dangerous. Wuming smiled faintly. With Wuming, an existence that did not belong to this world, any fate that was linked to Wuming would deviate from its fixed path. That was certain. Although his expression did not change, Gilgamesh clearly sighed in relief. Familiar with Gilgamesh, he could see that. But before Wuming could show an expression of ridicule, Gilgamesh immediately spoke. The Uruk is protected by this king and your power. You should go and support Chaldea and Ishtar. They are the main fighting force at the moment. Gilgamesh waved his hand, and the seat under Wuming shattered. Without another word, he chased Wuming out. After all, the king also cared about his reputation. How could he let Wu Ming laugh at him? It's still swift and fierce, Wu Ming said softly as he walked out of the divine tower. Looking at the canopy that shrouded the entire Uruk, as well as the sporadic magic beasts and monsters that could not enter the canopy, Wu Ming finally felt relieved. At least the Uruk was safe. Wu Ming leaped and flew directly into the sky. He penetrated the protective light film and killed the few kururu and monsters along the way. Then he flew in the direction of the Persian Gulf. Gilgamesh, who was at the top of the divine tower, looked at Wu Ming through the open window with his sharp eyes. He picked up the clay tablet at the side again. Being calm in the face of change was also the way of a king. In the direction of the Persian Gulf, Wu Ming would kill kururu and monsters whenever he encountered them. Wu Ming, who had almost unlimited magic power, was not someone these things could stop. Soon Wu Ming flew to a position close to the Persian Gulf. However, Wu Ming frowned. Although it was not obvious, Wu Ming could see that the sea level was rising. Not only that, but the ground was almost full of the figures of those monsters. They were densely packed like bees crowded in a hive. Most of the monsters were moving toward the Uruk, and a small number of them scattered in all directions. It seemed that these monsters knew how to kill. But unfortunately, except for Uruk and Erech Metropolis, the people of other cities had already taken refuge in the Uruk half a year ago. It could be said that if it were not for the Quetzalcoatl, the people of Uruk and Erech Metropolis would also have gone to the Uruk. However, it was precisely because the people of these two cities did not go to the Uruk that the burden on the Uruk was reduced, which could be regarded as a pleasant surprise. Even if these monsters did not go to the Uruk, they could only go to Erech Metropolis and Uruk. At the moment, those two cities were protected by Fanbaba, Leopard Man, Anna, and the missing Gadatsi and others. In all likelihood, they went to the Quetzalcoatl's territory. Wu Ming did not have to worry at all. Looking into the distance, Wu Ming found that the distant sky was covered by dark clouds. For some reason he could not see the situation on the sea clearly. He could only see some monsters floating on the sea. Wu Ming saw them very clearly, but these monsters were motionless as if they were in an incubator. Sure enough, they climbed up from the sea. These monsters were related to Tiamat, and Tiamat was in the Persian Gulf, so it was not surprising that these monsters climbed up from the Persian Gulf. Compared to the monsters on the ground and in the sea, the number of winged mermaids in the sky was not many. No, it was not that there were not many, but these magical beasts had become breeding grounds for the monsters. One after another, kururu flew to the ground, allowing the monsters to kill them. Then a new monster was born from the body of the killed kururu. Chapter 997. Perhaps it was because they had absorbed kururu, these monsters were taller than the other monsters that came ashore from the sea. Their bodies were bigger too. Their originally shriveled and weak bodies had become slightly bulkier. They looked a little stronger. However, Wu Ming wasn't here to see the demons and monsters. No matter how powerful these monsters were, as long as the final enemy, Tiamat, was defeated, these things would naturally fall apart without a fight. Wu Ming was there to discuss with Gadatsi and the others. Let's go to Erech Metropolis and Ur City. In fact, Wu Ming could sense Ishtar's general location through the contract between him and Ishtar. That location was in the direction of the dense forest. Moreover, Wu Ming did not see Gadatsi all the way from Uruk. The probability of her being killed by these monsters was too low. Could be said that it was almost zero. Putting Matthew aside, Quizzard and Ishtar, the two Venus goddesses, were also there. Moreover, the first Hassan might be hiding in the dark to follow Gadatsi and the others. In short, Gadatsi would definitely be fine. In this way, Wu Ming would think that Gadatsi and the others had gone to the dense forest. After killing all the kururu that surrounded them, Wu Ming did not intend to kill the monsters on the ground. In the entire Mesopotamia, other than the guards at the north wall, there were only humans in the dense forest of Uruk and the Quetzalcoatl. Wu Ming did not encounter Gadatsi and the others along the way, which meant that they had gone to the dense forest. The Uruk had Wu Ming's one-time use relic as insurance. The north wall was too far away from here. Gadatsi and the others were in the dense forest. All three places with humans were safe. Wu Ming did not need to kill these monsters that would continue to be produced. It was still the same statement: after defeating the goddess Tiamat, all problems would be solved. Ur City and Erech Metropolis were not far from the Persian Gulf. Not only Wu Ming but the monsters also soon arrived at these two places. Outside Ur City, Fanbaba did not have time to build a vine barrier as the monsters came one after another not long after Fanbaba arrived. Hence, your city was still the same as before, with only the dense forest around it as a natural defense. However, the dense forest was a natural hiding place for these monsters. It could be said that the dense forest did not help. However, it was fortunate that Finbabar was not fighting alone. A figure was flying in the sky. Several flashes of light flashed from the huge bow-shaped weapon of the figure from time to time. Countless monsters were blown away, and the energy generated from the explosions was enough to shatter these monsters. On the ground, a figure was wreaking havoc among the monsters. The explosions did not affect or damage this figure at all. Instead, every monster that came into contact with this figure would be split in half. This was the effect of the strangle skill. These two figures were Ishtar and Quetzalcoatl, the two goddesses of Venus. On the other hand, Gadotsi and Matthew gathered the people in your city and gathered them in a house that occupied a relatively large area. Quick, everyone come here. Funbaba took the opportunity to summon vines outside the house to surround it. Considering that the limbs of the monsters were quite sharp, Funbaba's vine barrier, whether it was in Eric Metropolis or here, was thicker and could automatically regenerate. It did seem powerful and effective, but it also meant that Funbaba had to spend a lot more mana, energy and time to use it. And because the monsters were approaching, Gadotsi and Matthew kept gathering the people here. They wanted to let the people gather in one house first. After all, building a vine barrier around this big house was much easier than building one around the entire UR city. Fortunately, Ishtar and Quizzard were helping to deal with the monsters, so Funbaba had time to build the vine barrier. But probably because the humans' discovered signal was sent to the group, the number of monsters increased, and Ishtar and Quizzard gradually found it difficult to deal with them. Unable to focus on Funbaba, Gadotsi, and the people behind them, the two of them had to concentrate on fighting the monsters. And because of this, the two cunning people accidentally exposed a few of the monsters, and allowed them to rush to the house that had not yet been fully built. Chaos, 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 chaos. The monsters rushed toward Gadotsi with an incomprehensible voice. Matthew dashed behind Gadotsi. Senpai, please be careful. Matthew blocked the monster, and looked at Gadotsi worriedly. Gadotsi did not care about his words of comfort because she saw a few more monsters running to the front of the house. If the monsters were to enter, it would be terrible. Matthew. However, Matthew was already having a hard time dealing with one monster, so he did not have time to deal with the other monsters. Funbaba, please? Gadotsi had no choice but to ask Funbaba for help. However, Funbaba was minding his own business and ignored Gadotsi. At this moment, a figure rushed out of the house. It was the winner from before. Ah! He held a wooden stick in his hand and rushed to the monster, under the surprised gazes of the other residents. It seemed that he wanted to stop it, even if the price was death. Be careful. Gadotsi could not help but shout. However, in the next second, the wooden stick of the winner was cut off by the monster, and its blade-like forelimbs slashed across the winner. However, under the shocked expressions of everyone, including Ishtar and Quizzard, the monster turned its head in puzzlement. In the next second, the golden chain passed through the monster's head, and the monster turned into ashes. Walalal dash. Poochie, poochie, poochie. The monsters that crossed the line of defense of the two Venus goddesses were all killed by the chains that penetrated their brains and turned into ashes. The one Matthew dealt with was no exception. Could it be Kingu? Matthew immediately guarded Gadotsi. Kingu had just reported his identity near the Persian Gulf, and Kingu's fighting style was very similar to this scene. It was inevitable that Matthew would be mistaken. Clang! The broken wooden stick fell to the ground, and the smooth cut meant that the monster's forelimbs were sharper than expected. Xian. Lord Hyunryong, the winner, slumped to the ground as if he had just survived a disaster. He muttered with excitement and gratitude. In the next second, Wuming descended from the sky and landed in front of the winner. Chapter 998. That's right, the attack just now wasn't Kingu but Wuming's. Seeing Wuming's arrival, Ishtar and Quizzard were relieved and no longer paid attention to them. Instead, they focused on dealing with the monsters. Even if there was something missing, Wuming would cover it up, so they didn't have to worry about it at all. On the other side, the winner touched his body with lingering fear. He clearly remembered that the monster just split him open. As expected of Hyunryong, the use of space magic is superb. The device on Gadotsi's wrist issued Roman's exclamation. Space magic. Gadotsi was puzzled. Senpai, it's actually like this. After all, Matthew was a servant. He saw the scene that just happened, so he simply explained it to Gidatsi. When Ramu's attack slashed down, Matthew saw a very thin space crack appeared in front of the winner. The size was just enough to accommodate Ramu's attack. When Ramu passed by the winner, it actually entered another space, so the winner naturally had nothing to do with it. So that's how it is. I didn't see it. Sure enough, assassin is very reliable. Gidatsi smiled foolishly, which made Matthew didn't know how to complain. On Wu Ming's side, he heard the conversation between Gidatsi and others, but he didn't interrupt Wu Ming. Indeed, as Roman and Matthew said, Wu Ming used the so-called space magic, the portal, to help the winner block the attack. Looking at the winner sitting on the ground, Wu Ming spoke. There are many ways to atone for your sins. Death is just an escape. You won't feel at ease in the underworld. Senpai. Hyunryong-sama. I'm sorry. The winner lowered his head guiltily. You're not only carrying your own life, but also that person's life. This is the life of two people. Live well. He patted the winner on the shoulder, and then left the winner sitting on the ground with a thoughtful look. Wu Ming walked toward Gidatsi while looking at Funbaba. Funbaba, go and help Ishtar and Quizzard. Woo. Funbaba immediately joined the battlefield. Assassin. Gidatsi waved her hand and ran toward Wu Ming. But then Gidatsi showed a dissatisfied look. Why won't Funbaba listen to me? Wu Ming couldn't help but laugh when he heard Gidatsi's question. In fact, Funbaba didn't make a move because of Wu Ming's order. Wu Ming wanted to see how determined the winner was. Although his body was trembling, he had the determination to face death. Since that was the case, carrying the lives of two people was what he should do now. Probably because he saw me coming. Wu Ming said perfunctorily. Wu Ming glanced at the crowd and didn't see Merlin. He couldn't help but ask Gidatsi. Where did Merlin go? Could it be that he died because of goddess Tiamat? Merlin said in the letter that he would be fine, but now that he couldn't see Merlin, Wu Ming thought that Merlin died. Mr. Merlin went to Eric Metropolis. He said that Ishtar, Quizzard, and Funbaba are here, so he didn't have to worry, so he went to Eric Metropolis alone. Although that was what she said, the worry between Gidatsi's eyebrows wasn't fake. Merlin was injured because of Tiamat before, and Ramu's figure was everywhere in the forest. It would be a lie to say that she wasn't worried. However, Merlin insisted on going. Gidatsi and the others couldn't persuade him, so they could only compromise. Merlin probably had his own thoughts. After all, it wasn't only the Tablet of Destiny that had prophecies. With this thought in mind, Wu Ming didn't continue the topic. By the way, we can't stay here anymore. We have to move these people to Uruk. Wu Ming pointed to the citizens who were hiding in the house behind him and didn't dare to come out. What? Gidatsi and Matthew were puzzled. As long as Funbaba built the vine barrier, the Ramu would no longer be a problem. The sea level in the Persian Gulf is continuing to rise. I'm afraid this place will be submerged. If the citizens continue to stay here, it will undoubtedly be a dead end. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming looked at the Ramu group that was slaughtered by Funbaba, Ishtar, and Quizzard. Although it was a massacre, the Ramu group was still more difficult to deal with than the demonic beast. These Ramu are not weak and they can evolve. The vine barrier can only work for a short period of time. It can't work forever. These monsters were all made of God's clay. It couldn't be that simple. Hyunryong is right. I have already detected that the sea level in the Persian Gulf is rising. I'm afraid it won't be long before the entire southwest region is submerged. We have to move these people. Gidatsi and Matthew nodded. Since Wu Ming and Roman said so, they believed it. But we don't have a means of transportation, and Quizzard doesn't have many pterodactyls. There's no way to move so many citizens to Uruk. Gidatsi sighed. If Uruk was submerged, then Eric Metropolis would undoubtedly be submerged as well. The combined population of the two cities was already more than 1,000. It was really difficult to deal with. Indeed, whether it's the distance between Uruk and Uruk or the population of the two cities, it's quite unfavorable for this transfer. Roman and Chaldea kept typing on the keyboard, calculating various solutions. However, Leonardo da Vinci suddenly said, "Why don't we just leave it to the Villo?" Roman was stunned. Gidatsi and Matthew were stunned for a moment, then looked at Wu Ming. Wu Ming didn't know what to say. Since I'm the one who raised the problem, I'll naturally solve it. I'll use the portal to send all of them to Uruk. You don't have to worry. As expected, Assassin is the most reliable. Gidatsi smiled. Speaking of which, who gave them the name Ramu? Wu Ming suddenly asked. It's me. Dr. Roman said weakly. After all, Rama was a mythical existence in Mesopotamia. Wuming as a Hyunryong was mysterious. Roman was afraid that this name had something to do with Wuming. However, because in this singularity, only the demon beast Ramu did not appear in the 11 sons of Tiamat, Roman arbitrarily named these monsters Ramu. Don't be nervous, I'm just asking. Although it was just asking, Wuming was still quite concerned. In other words, it was impossible not to be concerned. Chapter 999. Back then Wuming was called Ramu by Wuming. No matter how stupid he was, he should know that Hyunryong's identity had most likely become one of the 11 sons of Tiamat, which meant that Wuming was also considered Ramu, and these monsters were also called Ramu. It had to be said that having the same name as those monsters made Wuming feel quite disgusted. However, this was just a code name. After all, Wuming was not Ramu. It was just a myth that was tampered with by later generations. In addition, Wuming gave all the divinity that belonged to Hyunryong to Ereshkigal, so Hyunryong identity could be said to be half-crippled. Therefore, Wuming shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. It's always convenient to have a code name. By the way, did you meet Kingu? Do you know where it is now? Just now, the fake Enkidu who claimed to be Kingu ambushed us when we rushed to the Persian Gulf to support Miss Ishtar. However, Miss Quizzard took advantage of the abnormality and defeated the other party. After that, we rushed over because we were worried about the situation in the jungle. In other words, they did not know. However, Wuming speculated that Kingu was most likely still in the Persian Gulf. With the abnormality and injury as well as the appearance of Tiamat, it was impossible for Kingu to go anywhere else. Then Wuming spoke to Roman in Chaldea. Roman, send me all the information about the enemy at this singularity. Wuming reached out and tapped on the communicator on Gadatsi's wrist. Although it was a request, when Wuming touched the communicator, Chaldea's data was lost. Hey. Roman's panicked voice was heard. Roman was shocked. Wuming used an unknown method to hack into Chaldea through Gadatsi's terminal and directly copied the information about the 7th singularity from Chaldea's database. What kind of magic can do this? Roman sighed gloomily. There was probably such magic, but Wuming did not know how to do it. Wuming actually asked Kalis to help him obtain information about Chaldea. After all, to Kalis, Chaldea's firewall system was extremely old-fashioned, and it was not a problem to hack into it. Kalis was indeed busy preparing Wuming's trump card, but that did not mean that Kalis was completely useless. Otherwise, Kalis would not have come to this singularity with Wuming. I'll open a portal between Uruk and Eric Metropolis to Uruk. I'll leave the task of guiding the citizens to you. We'll meet again in Uruk. After Wuming finished speaking, he leaped into the sky and released his magic power, disappearing in the blink of an eye. After Wuming left, a black-purple ripple appeared in front of Matthew and Gadatsi. This was probably the portal that connected to Uruk. Perhaps such a portal had also appeared in Eric Metropolis. Senior, is Senior Villo okay? Matthew was a little worried. However, it was not Gadatsi who answered Matthew. Don't worry. He's a god that even I have a new level of respect for. Besides, he's just going to investigate. He won't directly attack Tiamat. Nothing will happen. The Quetzalcoatl who ran to Matthew's side comforted Matthew. Then she whistled, and a huge gray pterosaur flew in front of Quizzard. You guys go to Eric Metropolis to help guide the citizens. Leave this to me. Quizzard, who was listening to everyone's conversation, asked Fanbaba and Ishtar to temporarily block Ramu while she sent Gadatsi and the others to transport. Please, Quizzard. Please, Miss Quizzard. Gadatsi and Matthew asked one by one. Yes, leave it to me. Then let's meet in Uruk. The Quetzalcoatl waved at Gadatsi and Matthew as if it was an order. The Quetzalcoatl under them suddenly spread its wings and flew toward Eric Metropolis. Then Quizzard arranged for the citizens of Uruk to enter the portal one by one. Whether it was for survival or for Quizzard's dignity, they had to enter the portal. Because of this, in just a short period of time, the citizens of UR City had all entered the teleportation portal. Quizzard, come and help. At this time, Ishtar's exasperated voice was heard. The Ramu could no longer hold them back. Even if Fanbaba kept summoning vines to intercept, they still could not stop the Ramu's numbers. Rats could indeed bite an elephant to death, especially one that did not fight. Fanbaba and Ishtar were such elephants at this moment. Ishtar had to cherish her magic so she could only kill the Ramu bit by bit. The task of stopping the Ramu was actually handed over to Fanbaba. After all, it was more suitable for the task. Although Fanbaba could kill the Ramu, its main task now was to stop the Ramu and allow the citizens of Uruk to leave. It had to be said that it was already a good thing that they could hold on until now. The number of Ramu that came to support them was probably in the tens of thousands, and this did not include the dead Ramu. Moreover, one should not forget that the Ramu had always had reinforcements. With Ishtar and Fanbaba not fighting and Ramu continuously providing reinforcements, the number of Ramu could only increase, not decrease. However, now was probably the time to reap the harvest. After all, the citizens of Uruk had all been evacuated. Ishtar, you can go all out now. Fanbaba too, the feathered serpent goddess, waved at the human and beast in the sky and on the ground. Then Quizzard whistled again. A colorful long-haired pterosaur flew over. This was Quizzard's personal mount. When the pterosaur flew over Quizzard's head, Quizzard suddenly jumped and landed on the pterosaur's back. She kept increasing the pterosaur's altitude, as if something was about to reach the ground. Quizzard's method was not wrong. Something was about to reach the ground, and that was the anger that Ishtar and Fanbaba had been holding in for so long. Woo woo woo. Accompanied by Fanbaba's cry, an earthquake-like tremor spread from Fanbaba's feet to the surroundings. The Ramu were all shaken to the ground, and even the buildings in Uruk began to collapse and crack. However, this was just the appetizer. Quizzard, who was flying in the sky, had an exceptionally good vision. In her eyes, almost all the Ramu were instantly pierced by the mutated vegetation around them. Some weak vegetation that could not kill the Ramu even left seeds in the Ramu's body. In the next second, the sprouts in the Ramu's body suddenly grew, and directly broke the Ramu's body. Not only that, but the aftermath of the earthquake had also arrived. Countless cracks appeared on the ground, and countless Ramu fell into the cracks as if they had fallen into a bottomless abyss, disappearing without a trace. Chapter 1000. Woo woo woo. Fanbaba roared a few more times and the cracked ground suddenly healed. There were no traces of cracks at all, and even the vegetation on the ground was intact. The buildings in Ur City were restored to their original state, and some were even decorated with vines and flowers. It looked like a good place to live. Fanbaba was a mythical beast that was even more powerful than the sky bull Gujulan. It could easily change the terrain with just a wave of its hand. Moreover, Fanbaba could even restore the changed terrain to its original state. This highlighted how powerful Fanbaba was. The Ramu who were at the back of the forest were at a loss. How did the enemy suddenly become so powerful? Wouldn't it consume a lot of magic to change the terrain like this? Wasn't there enough magic? However, Fanbaba didn't lack magic at all, and it didn't consume much magic to control the mutation of the plants and the cracking of the earth. These could be said to be its innate ability. It had the powerful ability to change the terrain with just a wave of its hand. Even if the area was so large, it still didn't consume much of its magic. I underestimated Fanbaba, Quizzard said thoughtfully. While Quizzard was thinking, the attack on Rama didn't end. Then a golden star suddenly shone in the sky. In the next second, the golden star landed on the Ramu who weren't affected by the attack. In an instant, the whole ground shook again and the light covered everything. Quizzard quickly ordered the pterosaur to close its eyes and turn around. Otherwise, its eyes would be directly blinded by the light. After a moment, when the dazzling light dissipated, what was left was a bare and sunken ground. As for the Ramu, there was no doubt that there wasn't even a trace of it left behind. That guy is too messy. Quizzard couldn't help but frown. Fanbaba's attack wouldn't affect its body much, but Ishtar probably couldn't. The attack just now might have consumed all the magic in her body. As expected by Quizzard, Ishtar landed on the ground of Ur City. It seemed that she had used up a lot of her magic. In fact, Ishtar wasn't like Fanbaba. The attack just now directly used up all the magic in her body. Ishtar was right. Ishtar, are you okay? Quizzard landed on the ground and came before Ishtar. He could not help but reprimand him. You're too reckless. Yenryong can't replenish your magic now. I accidentally used too much magic. Ishtar laughed. She was obviously acting dumb. However, Ishtar had Wuming's support after all. Even if Wuming's 3 magic crystals were used up and he couldn't replenish Ishtar's magic quickly, with the contract between Ishtar and Wuming, Ishtar could recover quickly. Moreover, don't forget who Ishtar was. She was the extremely capricious mistress of the heavens. Even if releasing such a terrifying attack would lead to insufficient magic, according to Ishtar's character, she had to release it. Ishtar wanted to release the resentment that she had been holding in for a long time. If she were to be timid because of the lack of magic, it would not be like Ishtar. Quizzard also understood Ishtar's temper. In addition, Ishtar and Wu Ming's contract could indeed help Ishtar recover her magic quickly. In the end, she didn't say anything. In short, Ishtar was not in a dangerous situation at the moment. They could immediately use the portal that Wu Ming left behind to go to Uruk. It would be very safe in Uruk. Let's go. Let's go to Uruk. Hyunryong's portal is still intact. It did not disappear because of the attack just now. In fact, after Fanbaba and Ishtar released the attack, Quizzard had already planned to fly to Eridu with the pterosaur, or directly to Uruk. However, when she landed just now, she found that the portal left behind by Wu Ming was not affected, which saved her a lot of effort. However, at this time, Fanbaba suddenly ran over and was ready to go to Uruk to wait for Wu Ming. However, Quizzard suddenly found a problem. That was, the portal left by Wu Ming was not big and Fanbaba was too big, so Fanbaba could not enter the portal at all. Quizzard and Ishtar looked at each other, not knowing what to do. They couldn't leave Fanbaba alone, not to mention other things. Wu Ming would definitely be angry. So, let Fanbaba run to Uruk? It was a little cruel. Woo. Probably seeing the doubts of the two, Fanbaba whimpered twice, and then its body emitted light. The light covered Fanbaba, and Fanbaba's body was gradually shrinking. It turns out that Fanbaba can shrink. Ishtar breathed a sigh of relief. However, when Fanbaba shrank, Quizzard and Ishtar, who saw the scene in front of them, were not calm. In front of them, a young girl with green eyes and long green hair appeared. On Wu Ming's side, on the way to the Persian Gulf, Wu Ming digested the information he got from Chaldea. Wu Ming really didn't know much about Tiamat, and this was the main reason why Wu Ming needed information. After confirming that Ur City and Eric Metropolis were safe, Wu Ming also had time to go to the Persian Gulf to find out what Wu Ming was most worried about: the relationship between Tiamat and the root black mud. Wu Ming looked down, and what he saw was black seawater, which was full of the root black mud's aura. This completely proved that Tiamat had the root black mud, and there was no need to investigate further. However, Wu Ming still had to go and find other information. Moreover, Wu Ming still had to find Kingu. After all, the Holy Grail that Wu Ming asked Kingu to keep on his behalf was still missing. There was still a person in it, and he had to find it as soon as possible. As for whether Kingu would give it to him, that was another matter. I don't know how Tachika and the others are doing. One had to know that the area below Wu Ming was supposed to be land, but it had turned into an ocean. There was no doubt that the sea level was rising. It was just that, the rate of sea level rise is a bit faster than I expected. After all, even if the sea changed into mulberry fields, there was still a process. Who would have thought that after a while, the land near the Persian Gulf would be submerged? Wu Ming shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He raised his arm. Shaoan, can you try to find Kingu's location? Not to mention that it was Enkidu's body. Enkidu and Kingu were both heavenly locks, so they should be able to sense it. Sure enough, chains appeared on Wu Ming's arm and pointed in a certain direction. It seemed that Kingu was there. Wu Ming's magical power erupted again, and with the help of his telekinesis, he flew out. Chapter 1001. On a tall mountain in the southeast. At this moment, due to the rising sea level, the Persian Gulf had almost completely submerged the southwest part of Mesopotamia. The only land was probably this tall mountain. The dark clouds in the sky seemed to be moving with the sea level. The sky here was already covered in dark clouds. And on the peak of this tall mountain, the white-clothed green-haired puppet stood at a place with an excellent view, looking at the Persian Gulf in the distance. However, its unfocused gaze showed that it was absent-minded at the moment. This person was the one who used Enkidu's body, the one who called himself Kingu. My mission is over, Kingu muttered to himself. It was probably because of Tiamat's awakening that Kingu had the time to think about his own matters on this mountain peak. And the constant headache from before was something that Kingu had been thinking about. He thought about why he could not face the Uruk Hyunryong, why he would have a headache, and why he would see some memories that did not belong to him. It's just a remnant effect of this body. Kingu often used this sentence to numb himself. But Kingu knew that it could only numb himself temporarily but not forever. Kingu had to admit that he was completely affected. Because of this, Kingu lured Wu Ming to the underworld and abandoned Gorgon. His goal was to wake Tiamat up as soon as possible. Only when Goddess Tiamat awakens would he be able to relax. As long as he could make Goddess Tiamat awaken before Wu Ming's influence caused his entire body to change, he would be able to complete the only mission he had in his memories. Kingu suddenly looked at a certain direction in the sky. A figure was flying in his direction. Without a doubt, it was Wu Ming who used Enkidu's senses to find Kingu. Celestial locks could sense each other. Kingu had already noticed this when Wu Ming brought Enkidu's celestial lock. Kingu's body was a genuine celestial lock in this era. It was much clearer than Enkidu's magical noble phantasm that wrapped around Wu Ming's arm. Therefore, after knowing that Wu Ming was coming, Kingu basically avoided Wu Ming. To be safe, Kingu didn't even come into contact with Uruk's servants. Even if there was a chance to kill Chaldea's master, Kingu gave up many opportunities to avoid being deeply influenced by Wu Ming again. Although Kingu met Wu Ming in the end, it couldn't resist Wu Ming. When Gorgon lost its self-control and was influenced by Tiamat to attack the North Wall, Kingu had been holding back. Even if it didn't want to meet Wu Ming, it waited until Wu Ming threw a great sun at him. But after it made a move, it immediately slipped away because it was influenced by this body again. As a result, it almost made Gorgon misunderstand that it was rebelling. However, it was precisely because of Gorgon's misunderstanding that Kingu had the idea of rebelling. It wanted Gorgon to use death to wake up Tiamat at this moment. This was Kingu's idea at that time. Although Kingu also wanted Gorgon to fulfill his wish of destroying all the humans in Mesopotamia, Kingu was worried that it would become a variable in the long run. But unfortunately, the nightmare that dragged Tiamat into the dream had already discovered the clues and did not let it leave when Tiamat woke up. Kingu was naturally referring to Merlin. But it didn't matter anymore. Mother was awake anyway and it was no longer needed. Kingu looked at the Persian Gulf and turned to look at Wu Ming's increasingly clear figure. Now, it only had to solve the problem caused by this body, even if the end result was death. Kingu was abnormal at this moment. Its purple eyes calmly looked at Wu Ming, who was floating in the air parallel to it. And when Wu Ming saw that Kingu did not escape, he wanted to have a chat with Kingu. Should I call you Kingu or should I call you Enkidu's successor? Wu Ming was the first to speak. Name doesn't matter. Kingu answered Wu Ming calmly. It looked like it had given up everything to fight Wu Ming in the final battle. But Wu Ming could see something from this sentence. Kingu admitted that it was not Tiamat's son, Kingu. It was just a name given to it. Similarly, Kingu also realized that it was a consciousness produced by Enkidu's body. In other words, it was Enkidu's successor. I can see that your nature is not bad. Why do you stand on the opposite side of humans? Of course it is because this is Mother's wish. Kingu answered Wu Ming's question without hesitation. I am Mother's son who loves Mother. I am a puppet loyal to Tiamat. I am also another consciousness produced by Enkidu's body. Helping Mother fulfill her wish is my everything. Kingu's voice suddenly became louder. Kingu admitted everything. It was a fake Enkidu who used the name Kingu. It was a puppet controlled by Tiamat. It had no memories, no friends, no family. It was a pitiful weapon, tool, that could not even be considered a living being. The real Kingu had a mother and friends. He stood on his mother's side and died for her. God Kingu died a worthy death without regrets. Enkidu also had Gilgamesh, a close friend, and Wu Ming, a person he believed in and served. His friend, Gilgamesh, treated him as his only friend and would always remember him. The god he believed in brought him to his side. Enkidu died without regrets. As for Kingu, it was just a double imposter who used the name Kingu in Enkidu's body. It had nothing. Even the memories that appeared in its mind because of Wu Ming were not Kingu's but Enkidu's. All it had was a little bit of jealousy and envy. Even its long-awaited new human brothers were disgusting creatures. It was only because they were Mother's son that Kingu didn't say anything. However, it still didn't want to stay with those creatures. Moreover, even Kingu's mother, Tiamat, didn't need it anymore. This was because Kingu had given his heart, the holy grail that disturbed the singularity, to Tiamat. Firstly, it was to increase Tiamat's power. Secondly, it was to return everything to Tiamat so that she could deal with her own affairs. However, after giving the holy grail to Tiamat, Kingu could no longer hear his mother's voice. It was as if Tiamat had unilaterally cut off the connection. That's right. It was as if a tool had lost its value and would naturally be discarded. Now it had nothing. Chapter 1002. Now it had lost everything. Therefore, after Tiamat abandoned it, It chose to accept all the memories and influence brought about by Enkidu's body. It was also because of this that it no longer had a headache when facing Wuming. Hee. At this moment, Kingu actually smiled at Wuming. Coupled with that familiar face, Wuming could not help but feel that Enkidu was smiling at him. Then Kingu said something that shocked him. Lord Wuming, you came to me to ask for the Holy Grail, right? Kingu knew Wuming's name. How could Wuming not be shocked? Uruk Hyunryong's real name had always been a mystery in Sumer mythology. Only Gilgamesh and Enkidu knew Wuming's real name. Even the Sumer's god En and Gilgamesh's father, Lugarbanda, who made a deal with Wuming, did not know. From this, it seemed that Kingu had really accepted the memories brought about by Enkidu's body. Although he did not know if it was all or part of the memories, Wuming knew that it was no longer just Kingu, but a Kingu mixed with Enkidu's memories. It was no longer just Kingu. Then, without waiting for Wuming to recover from his shock, Kingu spoke again. The Magic King's Holy Grail is my heart. I have already returned the Holy Grail to Mother. The heart was given to someone else, but Kingu was still alive. There was no doubt that it had found a replacement for the heart. It was obvious that it was the Holy Grail that Wuming had asked Kingu to protect before leaving. Wuming couldn't help but frown. Wuming could not possibly dig out Kingu's heart, could he? Besides, Kingu already had Enkidu's memories, so it could be considered half an Enkidu or a successor to Enkidu. Furthermore, it seemed like Kingu did not intend to become enemies with Wuming anymore. Wuming could not dig out its heart no matter what. Since that's the case, I'll leave the Holy Grail with you for now. I'll take it out when I find something to replace your heart. Then Wuming waved his hand and Enkidu's heavenly lock flew towards Kingu. But just to be safe, I can't let you act alone. Who knew what Kingu would do next? Tiamat was its mother, and it had become its obsession. If something bad happened, Wuming would have no one to cry to, so it was better to keep it by its side. Even to an imposter like me, you're still as gentle as ever, Sir Wuming. Kingu smiled, but its heart was in pain. The nicer Wuming was to it, the more upset it felt. Just as the heavenly lock was about to touch Kingu, Kingu suddenly raised its hand and condensed magical power into a hand knife, as if it was resisting. This was within Wuming's expectations. However, in the next second, Kingu's action made Wuming's pupils dilate. Poochie. Kingu stabbed its hand knife into its own chest, and blood splattered everywhere. Wuming. Sir, although I don't have the right to say this, but you and my mother are my everything. I've already repaid what I owe to my mother. Now, it's time for me to return to you what I owe you. In the next second, Kingu dug out its heart. Along with the scarlet blood, a pure golden Holy Grail appeared in Kingu's hand. Then Kingu used the last of its strength to throw the Holy Grail in Wuming's direction. I'm very ashamed of my previous interference. This body is Enkidu's body, not mine, but I can only atone for my sins with my death. After Kingu finished speaking, it collapsed on the ground and did not move at all. Only the blood that flowed out of its heart stained the ground around it. In the end, Jianghu's purple eyes, which seemed to be satisfied, slowly closed. Wuming subconsciously used the Holy Grail to look at Kingu lying in a pool of blood without saying anything. He just looked at it quietly. Kingu had already decided to die. Although it could still be saved, Wuming did not have the right to interfere, because that was the choice made by the consciousness of Enkidu's body. Wuming respected Enkidu. It's probably because your memories have affected it too deeply, Wuming said to Enkidu's heavenly lock as if they were chatting. Heavenly lock, which had already returned to Wuming's side, wrapped around Wuming's body and rubbed Wuming's face to show its approval. Enkidu himself knew how heavy his feelings for Wuming were. To Enkidu, Wuming was like a father, a lover, a teacher, and a god that he believed in from the bottom of his heart. After Enkidu was cursed to death by the gods, his soul also willingly left with Wuming and became Wuming's noble artifact. From this, it could be seen how heavy Enkidu's feelings for Wuming were. Through the restraining force, this emotion had become something shared by every parallel world's Enkidu, and the Enkidu of this singularity was no exception. The heavy feelings turned into memories and stayed in Enkidu's body for a long time after his death. Wuming was the primer that opened up these memories. After Kingu saw Wuming, the memories that had been gathered in his body for a long time surged into his heart and turned into feelings. They fought with his thoughts of Tiamat, causing Kingu to have a headache. However, Kingu was just another consciousness that was born in Enkidu's body. How could a piece of white paper that was only stained with a little red resist the assimilation of a piece of paper that was stained with different colors? It was only a matter of time before Kingu was occupied by Enkidu's memories. It was because of this that Kingu chose to kill Gorgon and awaken Tiamat. This was to prevent him from changing after accepting Enkidu's memories. As it turned out, Kingu had indeed undergone an unprecedented change. If one had to describe it, the current Kingu was very similar to the Ishtar in this singularity. The Ishtar in this singularity was a new personality that merged with the goddess of the gods, Inanna, and the modern human girl, Rin Enosaka. It was just that the personality of a god was the main part, and the personality of a human was the secondary part. But even so, this was still a new personality that was different from the gods Inanna and the human Rin Enosaka's new personality. The current Kingu was a new personality that merged with Enkidu's memories, and the consciousness of Kingu formed in this singularity. The new personality not only had love for Tiamat, but also had feelings for Wuming. Because Enkidu's memories had a huge impact on Kingu, the new personality's feelings for Wuming took up most of the time, and its love for Tiamat took up a small part. Furthermore, Kingu thought that Tiamat had unilaterally given up on him, so the only thing left in his mind was his feelings for Wuming, or rather, his guilt. Chapter 1003. It was probably because of his feelings for Wuming that the new personality Kingu thought that he had committed a grave mistake and died out of shame. In the end, Kingu dug out his own heart, and gave it back to Wuming. Kingu's nature isn't bad, he was just used by someone else. Wuming's tone carried a hint of anger when he thought of this. Kingu was still a consciousness born from Enkidu's body. For Enkidu, who had already gained intelligence and was known as a pure person, even if it was a body left behind after death, the consciousness born from it wouldn't be too bad. At most, it would just lack some compassion. In a situation like Kingu's, unless someone deliberately guided him. This was what made Wuming angry. Someone used Enkidu's body to create a new personality. This person must be Gidia. Enkidu was Enkidu. Even if it was a different consciousness, it was still a consciousness born from Enkidu. It wasn't something that anyone could touch. Wuming believed that if Gilgamesh knew about this, he would be just as angry as Wuming or even more angry. Gilgamesh's only close friend had been used. Just this point alone was enough to make him furious. Even though Gilgamesh didn't react much when he found out about Enkidu's impersonation, that was only the self-cultivation of a wise king. If Gilgamesh had the opportunity to deal with Gidia, Gilgamesh would definitely let him have a taste of the oldest king's anger. Of course, Wuming was the same. Wuming looked at the circle of light floating in the sky and said quietly, "Gidia, you're dead." Wuming had decided that if he didn't turn Gidia into ashes, he would read his name backwards. Just as Wuming was furious, Enkidu's heavenly lock seemed to have made a decision and acted on its own. Walala, like a golden snake, the heavenly lock slowly approached Kingu's body, which was about to turn cold, and stabbed into the gap in Kingu's heart. Shaoen? Wuming could feel that Enkidu was gradually leaving him. It didn't matter whether he left or not. After all, Wuming didn't treat Enkidu as his noble phantasm. She had her own thoughts and Wuming had no right to stop her. However, Wuming couldn't understand what was happening. The heavenly lock that was wrapped around Wuming's body completely left Wuming's body and slowly entered Kingu's heart through the gap. The gap in Kingu's heart was like a bottomless pit. Enkidu's heavenly lock was only left with a tail that hadn't been filled yet. Finally, the heavenly lock completely entered Kingu's body. In the next second, a silver light with a hint of gold shone from Kingu's body. Then the gap in Kingu's heart disappeared and the blood on his body disappeared. Even the pool of blood on the ground disappeared. Jianghu, on the other hand, stood up and looked at Wu Ming with a smile. Master Hyunryong. This gave Wu Ming an unprecedented surprise. At this moment, the person in front of him wasn't Kingu, but the real Enkidu. Enkidu and Kingu both knew his real name. However, probably because Enkidu was Wu Ming's chief priest, she preferred to call Wu Ming Master Hyunryong. This was the tacit understanding between Wu Ming and Enkidu. Moreover, this was undoubtedly Enkidu's smile, so the person in front of him was definitely Enkidu. You fused with Kingu's body? However, after asking this question, Wu Ming wanted to slap himself. This was clearly Enkidu's body, and Kingu was just another consciousness born from this body. How could he say that he had fused with Kingu? It should be Enkidu who had returned to his body. In other words, the heaven lock Enkidu had returned. Seeing Wu Ming's embarrassment, Enkidu smiled and nodded. I've accepted Kingu, so you can say that I've fused with Kingu. Looking at Enkidu's eyes, Wu Ming noticed that the pair of golden eyes, Enkidu's golden eyes in the game, flashed with a hint of purple. It seemed that the two of them had really fused. It won't be a problem for you, right? Wuming was a bit worried. After all, Kingu was determined to die, so Wuming was worried that Enkidu would be affected. However, Enkidu shook his head. Even if it's not for the next plan, I won't seek death for you anymore. After Enkidu said this, Wuming understood that Kingu and Enkidu had indeed fused together. After all, Enkidu's eye referred to both her and Kingu. Then Wuming sighed. Is this really okay? If Enkidu insisted on saving Kingu, Wuming had other ways. For example, he could immediately use the teleportation portal to find Gilgamesh in Uruk. The Holy Grail in Gilgamesh's treasury could be used as a replacement. There was no need for Enkidu and Kingu to fuse at all. That's good. Enkidu smiled and nodded. It's the consciousness of this body that wants to die. Since that's the case, let me, who is also the consciousness of this body, make the change. Kingu was determined to die. Since that was the case, Enkidu and Kingu would fuse together and directly dispel Kingu's suicidal thoughts. After all, no matter how much Kingu wanted to die, he had to be careful. This body no longer belonged to Kingu alone, but also to Enkidu. If he dragged Enkidu to die with him, it would go against Wuming's intentions. It was already treacherous enough, so it could not make any more mistakes. Therefore, Kingu dispelled the idea of suicide. Moreover, Kingu is the consciousness of my body after all. He can totally be me. Since that's the case, there's nothing wrong with fusing with me. Needless to say, Enkidu was the most open-minded. After all, they were the consciousness of the same body. Moreover, Kingu was indeed a pitiful person. Enkidu was willing to fuse with Kingu. Not only could he save Kingu, but he could also obtain a body. It was killing two birds with one stone. Enkidu had no reason to reject. Since it's your decision, I won't say anything else. Since it was something Enkidu wanted to do, Wuming would let it go and agree. Again, Enkidu was not Wuming's tool or relic. She was Enkidu. In Wuming's eyes, Enkidu was not only a complete body, but also a perfect person with a perfect personality and mentality. Although Leonardo da Vinci would be dissatisfied if he heard this, Wuming thought so. However, what Enkidu said next made Wuming's impression of Enkidu as a perfect person crumble. It's just that this body doesn't have a chest, so I'm not used to it. Chapter 1004. After saying that, Enkidu subconsciously touched his chest. It was flat. At the same time, a hint of regret appeared on Enkidu's face. Wuming did not know what to say. Indeed, when Enkidu was by Wuming's side, he was influenced by Wuming and evolved into a girl's body. Enkidu also gradually got used to being a girl. However, Enkidu and other parallel worlds were all genderless clay figurines, including this particular Enkidu. This body had already been fixed and could not be changed. If he wanted to change it, Wuming might be able to do it if he went back to his roots. Asterisk cough cough, asterisk little Enkidu. Wuming looked at Enkidu, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He almost got dragged into this mess by Enkidu. Enkidu saw Wuming's embarrassed expression and smiled again. The angelic aura of a girl appeared. It's fine, Lord Hyunryong. I can get used to this body. You don't have to worry about me. However, Wuming was not worried. He just did not know what to say. However, Enkidu was giving Wuming a way out. Wuming would not refuse. However, Wuming inexplicably felt that Enki had the potential to be a black-bellied person. He looked at Enkidu again. Just as Enkidu said, he could get used to it quickly. However, it was not Enkidu who got used to the body. Instead, it was the body that got used to Enkidu's aura. Enkidu had always been by Wuming's side. He already had a hint of a girl's aura. After fusing with Enkidu, this genderless clay figurine also produced a hint of a girl's aura. Did this mean that the body was getting used to Enkidu? Perhaps Gilgamesh would be stunned if he saw Enkidu like this. Wuming could not help but think. While Wuming was imagining Gilgamesh's expression, Enkidu, who had come to Wuming's side, spoke. Lord Hyunryong, regarding mother, I have some countermeasures. A hint of seriousness appeared on Enki's face. Upon hearing this, Wuming's eyes narrowed. Just as Enkidu had said, she definitely had a way to deal with Tiamat. After all, Kingu's consciousness also existed in this body. It was just that it had merged with Enkidu. Kingu was the one who possessed the Holy Grail and was the main culprit behind the chaos. It could be said that he was the one who understood Tiamat the most. Mother is a perfect being who was born without death. As the mother goddess of life, as long as there is life on the surface, she will not have the concept of death. Wuming nodded. He was very clear on this point. God Tiamat was killed and her body was used to create heaven and earth. This was only in name. Perhaps the gods wanted to erase the fact that God Tiamat was still alive, so they said that. Unfortunately, no matter how much the future humans believed that Tiamat was dead and separated into heaven and earth, Tiamat was still alive and well. This was because as long as there was life on the surface, just this point alone was sufficient to prove that Tiamat was still alive. This was a fundamental problem and could not be affected by the later generations' fabrications. Moreover, Magician was able to discover the truth behind Tiamat's unkillable existence. At the very least, Wu-Ming had obtained information about Tiamat from Chaldea's database. This was also one of the reasons why he supported Tiamat's survival. And the gods would not destroy all life on the surface just to kill Tiamat. Not to mention other things, she was still their mother. Because Tiamat could not be killed, the gods, who were helpless, chose to seal Tiamat and banish her to the void dimension. When Wu-Ming entered the mirror world to retrieve his class card, he had to pass through the void dimension. It was a world with nothing, not even heaven and earth. There was only busy darkness. And Tiamat had been in there for who knew how many years. Perhaps tens of thousands of years, perhaps hundreds of millions of years, or perhaps. It was an age that Wu-Ming could not understand. After all, who knew how long these gods had lived? If we want to destroy Mother, we need the help of someone who has mastered the ultimate of death. Although Enkidu's words were provocative, Wu-Ming did not have the time to complain. Instead, Wu-Ming's eyes lit up. Isn't this referring to the first Hassan? Seeing Wu-Ming's eyes light up, Enkidu smiled and nodded. That's right, it's that old man. Enkidu had never seen the first Hassan before, but she could tell from Wu-Ming's words when he examined Uxiumugul. There's one more thing, Lord Wu-Ming. If we can lure Mother to the underworld, our chances of success will be greater. Enkidu was hesitant when she said this. This was something that could not be helped. After all, it was extremely difficult to lure Tiamat to the underworld. Not to mention that the underworld had always been far away in the north because of the Stone Soldier 8 formations. Tiamat was not a fool. She would not enter that place so easily. Enkidu stopped talking and Wu-Ming fell into deep thought. Wu-Ming was not thinking about anything else but whether this plan would work. If it was just Tiamat alone, this plan would definitely work. Moreover, even without Wu-Ming, the remaining people would be able to solve this crisis. Wu-Ming suspected that the first Hassan from the previous singularity had given him face because he knew that this singularity needed him. If it was a coincidence, it would be too much of a coincidence. Wu-Ming did not believe in fate, because Wu-Ming himself was an existence that could disrupt fate. However, the premise was that Tiamat was still the original Tiamat. On the contrary, Tiamat somehow obtained the Black Origin soil. Even Wu-Ming himself did not know what that thing was. He only knew that it was something that belonged to the Origin, and it was a natural enemy of Wu-Ming. Wu-Ming was worried that Tiamat would change because of the Black Origin soil. No, it would definitely change. Aziz Dakaha in the box court world had undergone a huge change after being possessed by the Black Origin soil. Whether it was his body or his abilities, they were all different. Tiamat might change as well. Wu-Ming took 2 steps toward the cliff next to him. He looked at the dark Persian Gulf and then at the dense forest. The sea level had already risen above the dense forest. No, rather than saying that the sea level was rising, it was more like the Black Origin soil that filled the entire ocean was slowly submerging the land. As the Black Origin soil continued to spread, the dark clouds in the sky also moved little by little, as if reflecting the arrival of the apocalypse. Wu-Ming turned around and looked at Enkidu. Anyway, let's go back to Uruk first. Mesopotamia, the central city of the Sumer dynasty, Uruk. The originally lively Uruk was now quite crowded, not only because the citizens of Uruk and Erech metropolis had come to Uruk, but also because of the people resurrected by Ereshkigal and the soldiers on the north wall. That's right, the people on the north wall had returned. Chapter 1005. Yes, the people of the North Wall had returned. This was the order issued by Gilgamesh to return to the capital. The magical beasts that attacked the North Wall were killed by the Dinger. After the calculation, nearly half of the treasures in Gilgamesh's treasury were consumed. The semi-disabled commander Muzamov was also killed by the Dinger that was modified by Zhuge Kong Ming. After Gilgamesh received the news that the magical beasts in the North Wall had been annihilated, he ordered the supreme commander of the North Wall, Leonidas I, to lead the soldiers back to the Uruk. Gorgon had summoned all the magical beasts that were located in the North Wall. It was impossible for the magical beasts to exist in the north. Even the magical beast's nest was impossible. Gilgamesh was worried that the Kururu and the Ramu that Chaldea had named would attack humans in other places because they couldn't enter the Uruk. So he ordered the people of the North Wall to immediately return to the Uruk. In the land of Mesopotamia, only the southern jungle, the Uruk city and the North Wall were confirmed to have humans. The southern jungle and the Uruk were protected. Only the North Wall couldn't protect the flying Kururu. Zhuge Kongming agreed with King Gilgamesh's order after hearing the news. He immediately discussed with Leonidas I to lead the soldiers back to the Uruk. It was worth mentioning that the return route was underground. Although the acceleration ability of the underground passage couldn't support so many people, but it was a hidden underground passage. The underground passage was protected by the stone soldiers. The magical beasts couldn't detect it and couldn't enter. It was very safe. Although not all the soldiers of the North Wall had arrived in the Uruk, but most of them had entered the underground passage. It was only a matter of time. At this moment, it could be said that almost all the human cities of this era had gathered in the Uruk. However, because of this, the Uruk was completely overcrowded. Siduri, who had followed the citizens of Erech Metropolis back to the Uruk, ordered the soldiers to speed up the construction of temporary residences for everyone and every family. At the same time, she was worried about the supplies. The various utensils were still manageable, but the main problem was that there was not enough food. Currently, the periphery of the Uruk was filled with those strange magical beasts. Only the Uruk, which had been transformed into a fortress city, was safe. However, there was not much food in the city. According to Siduri's calculations, it was only enough for the entire city's citizens to eat for 3 to 4 days, and this was under the condition that they had to scrimp and save. The real time might be even shorter than this. Fortunately, the people gathered in Uruk did not complain, especially when they saw the dark clouds drifting over from the Persian Gulf. Or rather, the dark red ominous clouds. The citizens became even more united. The elderly were supported by the young people when they walked. People gave way to each other when they ate. There were also many people who invited people who didn't have a place to live to stay in their homes. In short, it was a scene of unity where everyone helped each other. Every time Siduri saw this scene, she would have a thought. This was probably the reason why the Uruk could last for half a year under the attack of the magical beasts. Siduri's adjutant, who was assisting her, would occasionally be stunned by the smile that came from Siduri's thought. The thin veil couldn't hide this overly sacred smile at all. But after this thought, Siduri's heart was filled with deep worry. After seeing the good side of people, she really didn't want to see the evil side of people. Siduri knew that now everyone was living well. If 7 days later, when there was a lack of food, the evil in people's hearts would probably be drawn out. If an example had to be given, it would be like the 2 citizens of Uruk who were challenged by Ramu to a one-on-one duel. Both of them would try their best to kill each other for a slim chance of survival. This was also something that couldn't be helped. I hope that King Gilgamesh and Lord Hyunryong can solve this crisis as soon as possible. Looking at the direction of the God Tower, Siduri prayed. That's right, this was the reason why Gilgamesh didn't appear at this critical moment. He was in the God Tower discussing with Chaldea and the others. At the top of the Uruk God Tower, between the thrones. All the soldiers in the room had disappeared because they were all sent out by Gilgamesh to support Siduri's work. Only Gilgamesh and Chaldea's group, the gods that Wuming pulled into the group, and a little girl who looked like a young version of Enkidu running around with Fufu between the thrones were left in the room. This little girl was Fanbaba, who returned to Uruk with Quizzard and Ishtar. Although everyone, including Gilgamesh, was surprised, the most important thing now was to discuss Tiamat. The issue of Fanbaba was put at the back. At this moment, everyone was standing in the middle of the thrones, surrounding a virtual projection. A moving living factory, magic power enough to launch interstellar travel, a huge life source stored in the body, the God's Ark that humans will need hundreds of years to realize. Roman's voice was heard from the projection. This is Tiamat's true face. As his voice fell, Gadotsi and the others showed a melancholy expression. However, Gilgamesh did not buy it. You bastard! Are you on Tiamat's side? Why isn't there a strategy or two on it? Gilgamesh came to the front of the virtual projection with a slightly ferocious expression and yelled at Roman in Chaldea. Let me finish. Roman also had a rare temper. He actually stood up from his seat and retorted at Gilgamesh. It's Marduk's hand axe, right? At this moment, Merlin, who was at the side, spoke. Merlin's injuries because of Tiamat had almost recovered. Moreover, because he no longer needed to use magic power to put Tiamat into a deep sleep, Merlin had become a rare combatant, whether it was using the staff in his hand or a weapon like a sword. That's right, it's Marduk's hand axe. Roman nodded and sat down again. The god Marduk is the existence that killed Tiamat in the myths. His hand axe should be able to cause damage to Tiamat. This sentence came from Leonardo da Vinci, who was next to Roman in Chaldea. However, he only said can cause damage, and did not say can kill Tiamat. This meant that Leonardo da Vinci did not dare to jump to the conclusion that Marduk's hand axe could kill Tiamat. After all, although the myth said that Tiamat was killed, the facts proved that Tiamat was not dead at all. Otherwise, she would not have come out to wreak havoc in Mesopotamia. Therefore, it was uncertain whether Marduk's hand axe would be effective. Chapter 1006. And there was an extremely important point. Because Tiamat's authority came to Eric Metropolis along with the sea level, we couldn't take Marduk's hand axe with us, Quizzard interjected. Even if we wanted to use it now, we couldn't. Quizzard interjected with a serious expression. At this moment, the rising sea level had already submerged nearly half of Mesopotamia's land. If it wasn't for the Nabistan's tooth that Gilgamesh and Juga Kongming developed together, the rising sea level would have already reached the Uruk. Everyone present had already discussed the rising sea level earlier. The spreading Black Sea was Tiamat's authority. There was no need to confirm this point. It was completely obvious. What should we do now? Our only hope of a weapon has sunk into the Black Sea. Gadotsi was slightly unwilling to give up. Gadotsi was told by everyone that she couldn't touch the sea level, or she would become Tiamat's person. Although she had never seen what a person who became Tiamat looked like, Gadotsi inexplicably didn't want to see that scene. At this moment, a voice that didn't belong to anyone present sounded. I can probably take it out. However, Gadotsi immediately recognized the owner of this voice. Assassin. As expected, everyone looked at the source of the voice. Wu Ming walked out of a portal that had appeared out of nowhere. Because of some special power that I have mastered, the sea level is ineffective against me. I can take out Marduk's hand axe, but that axe probably won't have much effect on Tiamat. Before Wu Ming could finish, a small figure jumped into Wu Ming's arms and interrupted Wu Ming's speech. Master, the green-haired little girl called out in a childish voice, which confused Wu Ming. However, Wu Ming felt the connection between himself and the little girl in his arms and suddenly showed an expression of disbelief. You are Fanbaba? Fanbaba didn't answer. She just hugged Wu Ming's neck and rubbed against him like a small animal that was close to humans. And this was a gesture that Fanbaba liked to do to Wu Ming. What's going on? Wu Ming looked at Quizzard and Ishtar. Fanbaba was with the two at that time. Even if you ask, we don't know what's going on. Quizzard and Ishtar were also depressed. How could Fanbaba suddenly turn into a human? They originally thought that it was related to Wu Ming, but it turned out that Wu Ming didn't know either. Regarding this matter, Gilgamesh and Chaldea also discussed it, but because Tiamat's matter was more important, they put it aside and didn't discuss it. Therefore they didn't know what was going on. However, someone knew. It's probably because she followed you all year round, which caused Fanbaba's body to change. A gentle and familiar voice entered everyone's ears. Gadotsi and the others' faces froze, only Gilgamesh's eyes inexplicably lit up. In the next second, a beautiful green-haired person also walked out of the portal and stood beside Wu Ming. She stretched out her hand and smiled as she stroked Fanbaba's cheeks and hair. This person was Enkidu. In an instant, a beautiful picture seemed to appear in front of everyone. It was a picture of a warm family of three. Wu Ming hugged Fanbaba, and Enkidu stood beside him. It was like a father hugging his daughter, and his wife stood beside him with a smile. Upon closer inspection, Enkidu and Fanbaba both had green hair. Just this point alone made Fanbaba look very much like Enkidu. If he didn't know that Fanbaba and Enkidu didn't have this kind of relationship, even Gilgamesh almost thought that they were mother and daughter. No, in fact, Gilgamesh was already very shocked. Senior Villo, please be careful. Matthew was the first to summon his shield, and looked worriedly in Wu Ming's direction. Assassin? Is that an enemy? Gadotsi also shouted in panic. However, other than Gadotsi and Matthew, the others didn't do anything. It seemed that the green-haired person opposite them was one of them. Don't worry, this person beside me is the real Enkidu. Wu Ming naturally understood what Gadotsi and Matthew were worried about. Naturally, they were worried that the person beside Wu Ming was Kingu. Well, that seemed to be right. The others didn't do anything because they saw that the person beside Wu Ming wasn't Kingu. After hearing Wu Ming's explanation, they all nodded as expected. Logically speaking, Kingu should be using Enkidu's appearance, so other than Kingu, only Enkidu would look like this. Since that was the case, for those who hadn't seen Enkidu before, this person must be Enkidu. However, Ishtar was a little confused. She had seen Enkidu before, so why was Enkidu filled with the aura of a young girl? Not only Ishtar but Gilgamesh was also shocked, just as Wu Ming had guessed. His originally sexless best friend had turned into a woman? What was going on? Enkidu? Gadotsi and Matthew looked at each other in confusion, but looking at the reactions of the people around them, it seemed probably really was Enkidu. However, Kingu and Enkidu looked exactly the same, so it was normal for Gadotsi and Matthew to mistake them for each other. Kingu is a new consciousness born in Enkidu's body. Enkidu has returned to this body, and this body's consciousness has merged with Enkidu. Now there is no Kingu, only Enkidu. Everyone suddenly understood. After all, who would have thought that Kingu was a consciousness born in Enkidu's body? Gilgamesh thought that Kingu couldn't be Kingu, but he also didn't think that Kingu was a consciousness born in Enkidu's body. Although Enkidu was a god's clay, it wasn't a special existence. Its body shouldn't have any consciousness after death, unless someone tampered with it. Gilgamesh narrowed his eyes. There was no doubt that the person who tampered with it was the culprit behind the burning of humanity. However, not everyone thought as far ahead as Gilgamesh. Everyone was focused on what was happening in front of them. Merge? Like Ms. Ishtar? Matthew asked with a vivid analogy. However, Ishtar shook her head, indicating that she wasn't as pure as Enkidu. Enkidu's situation isn't exactly the same as mine. Kingu was originally a consciousness born in Enkidu's body. Now that Enkidu was summoned back by Wu Ming, even if they merged, the two of them were originally a consciousness born in the same body. Logically speaking, it should be purer than mine. As she spoke, Ishtar hesitated. Chapter 1007. That's right, Ishtar's expression was very conflicted. The other party was indeed Enkidu. She could vaguely see a hint of disgust in Enkidu's eyes. Only Enkidu would look at her like that. Kingu would not. But, logically speaking, Enkidu should not have the aura of a young girl. Could it be that there was an unexpected change due to the fusion? It was because of this that Ishtar hesitated. But this was the only conclusion she could make at the moment. Even Gilgamesh came to the same conclusion, or rather he did not want to delve into it. This was indeed his close friend. Through unintentional eye contact, he could tell that this was not Kingu. Anyway, as long as it was Enkidu, it did not matter if it was a man or a woman. This was the magnanimity of the most ancient king. Actually, there was a small accident in the middle. Anyway, this is Enkidu without a doubt. Wu Ming made up an excuse. After determining Enkidu's identity, Wu Ming did not dwell on the issue of Funbaba turning into a human and returned to the original topic. If we use Marduk's hand axe to deal with Gorgon, it will definitely work. But if we use it to deal with Tiamat, I really don't think it will work. Wu Ming still had the same opinion. He could indeed retrieve Marduk's hand axe from Eric Metropolis that was submerged by the Black Sea, but it would take twice the effort for half the result. In short, Wu Ming was still against it. As expected, even Hyunryong said so. Chaldea's Roman let out a sigh. Since Hyunryong said so, there's a high chance that it won't work. Leonardo da Vinci added. Ishtar nodded as well. Hyunryong may be a foreign god, but in certain aspects she does no more than I do. Ishtar's expression was slightly unnatural. However, Gilgamesh would not let go of any opportunity to reprimand Ishtar. Heng, you are the goddess of greed who is obsessed with gems. Of course you don't know as much as a foreign god. Ishtar's body trembled. There was no doubt that he was right. There was nothing that could be done about it. Ishtar had been spoiled by all the gods. She had long been neglecting her duties. Even the bull of the sky, if it was any other normal Sumer god, they would more or less have some information about Tiamat. Although Ereshkigal was also a god of the Sumer pantheon, she was not a normal god. However, as everyone knew, Ereshkigal lived in the depths of the underworld all year round. She did not care about worldly affairs and only cared about the underworld. To be honest, she did not know much about Tiamat. As for Wu Ming, a foreign god, it was already good enough that he knew more than Ishtar. After all, he was only an outsider, who had stayed in Mesopotamia for less than 100 years. His joining of the Sumer pantheon was caused by the later generations of the Sumer pantheon. So what if I don't know? Isn't it fine as long as the Xianlong is here? Ishtar yelled at Gilgamesh as if she had nothing left to lose. This made Gilgamesh, who was delighted by Ishtar's embarrassment, laugh heartily. Ishtar's trusting words made Wu-Ming feel a little embarrassed. In fact, he did not understand either. What did he know? He was just a super high hypostasis dragon who had stayed in Mesopotamia for less than 100 years. At first, he just wanted to recover from his injuries and find Yggdrasil, who had fused with Fanbaba, so he made an agreement with Lugarbanda. He would protect the Uruk and the Uruk would believe in him. If it were not for the group of Sumer gods who came to Wu-Ming to chat and sound him out, Wu-Ming would not care about the Sumer pantheon. Maybe he did not even know who the king of the Sumer pantheon was, let alone Tiamat. The reason why Wu-Ming said that Martyr's hand axe did not work was entirely because Tiamat had the origin of black mud. Just like Az Dakaha, the whole dragon changed after he had the origin of black mud. His abilities were all different from before. It could be said that if it were not for Wu-Ming in the Hakata world, the upper level of the Hakata world would have perished, let alone the lower level. However, although Wu-Ming knew his own situation, Wu-Ming was not the pot calling the kettle black. But the others did not know that. They all thought that Wu-Ming made a judgment on the premise that he understood Tiamat. In their opinion, since Wu-Ming said that it did not work, it was probably true. Everyone's face sank, probably because the only way to work on Tiamat at present was also ineffective. Gilgamesh was the only one who smiled. But giving up without trying isn't this king's character. Or, Hyunryong, do you have a good idea? This was Gilgamesh's trust in Wu-Ming. He believed that Wu-Ming must have a way. However, Wu-Ming did not answer Gilgamesh's question. Instead, he looked at Merlin, who had not spoken much. Merlin, what do you think? Merlin was not a taciturn person like Anna, but surprisingly, Wu-Ming did not hear Merlin speak after arriving here. Me? What can I possibly think of it? Merlin tried to play dumb. Wu-Ming did not believe that Merlin insisted on going to Eric Metropolis alone without a purpose. Wu-Ming knew very well that the Eric Metropolis had a roller seal that could predict the future. Merlin might have seen something. But since Merlin did not want to speak in front of everyone, Wu-Ming decided to ask him in private later. Actually, I have been preparing my trump card. I need some time. Everyone couldn't help but widen their eyes. Can you deal with Tiamat? Gadatsi couldn't help but ask. Everyone's eyes were also focused on Wu-Ming. Yes. Wu-Ming's answer was simple and clear, as if he had a 100% chance of winning. However, Wu-Ming had no intention of explaining what his trump card was, which made Ishtar a little irritable. She actually knew Wu-Ming very well, not because of their teacher-student relationship, but because they were rivals. As the saying goes, the person who knows you best is not your friend but your enemy. Ishtar used to fight with Wu-Ming all day long and was defeated by him. Because of this, Ishtar, who studied Wu-Ming every day, was familiar with Wu-Ming. She knew that Wu-Ming would not fight a battle without preparation. Since Wu-Ming said yes, then there must be no problem. However, back to the past, no problem was no problem. Ishtar's irritable temper was one thing, but Ishtar's irritable temper was another. Because when it came to Ishtar's irritable temper, it was Wu-Ming who kept her in suspense. Damn it, Hyunryong, can't you be more straightforward? You're always keeping me in suspense. Ishtar crossed his arms in front of his chest and glared at Wu-Ming while gnashing his teeth. You really aren't cute, Ishtar. You have the same face, but Ereshkigal is cuter. Everyone was stunned. Right, there was still Ereshkigal. Chapter 1008. If it were not for Wu-Ming's words, everyone would not have been able to react. Because of Tiamat, after Gorgon left, everyone directly ignored Ereshkigal, the last figure of the three goddesses' alliance. When did you go to see Ereshkigal? Ishtar calmed down as if she was somewhat dissatisfied with Ereshkigal. Gorgon's exit was the work of me and Ereshkigal. When Wu-Ming said this, everyone understood why Gorgon left the North Wall in confusion. It turned out that the two Sumer gods worked together to deal with Gorgon. But Ereshkigal should be restricted by the three goddesses' alliance. Quizzard suddenly said. Then Wu-Ming nodded. Yes, because of this, Ereshkigal's divinity has almost completely disappeared, and the entire spirit base can only be forcibly maintained by the underworld. It has no combat power. Wu-Ming's implication was to tell everyone that Ereshkigal was no longer a threat, and there was no need to treat her as an enemy. Those who died suddenly have also been resurrected. Presumably Ereshkigal released their souls. Gilgamesh also interjected, proving that Ereshkigal was on the side of the humans. Really, how did that guy end up in such a sorry state? Ishtar complained proudly, but it was obvious that she was concerned about Ereshkigal. Seeing Ishtar's insincerity, Wuming could not help but smile. But don't worry, I have already given my divinity to Ereshkigal, and now she is fine, and I have also told her that if there is no other way, I will ask her for help, and she has agreed. Ishtar was shocked and her hands could not help but relax. However, before she had time to express her surprise, someone spoke first. You gave all your divinity to Ereshkigal? Roman of Chaldea exclaimed through the projection. But how is this possible? I have never heard of divinity being given away. This king also wants to give his divinity to others, but unfortunately, this king is the king who separates the human from the gods, so he must have part of the divinity. Gilgamesh spoke to shut Roman's mouth. The implication was that it was not impossible to take out the divinity. Indeed, no god had ever said that divinity could not be given away, and no magician had ever proven whether divinity could be given away. No did not mean can't. Why do I feel that you are weird now? Quizzard said. Quizzard probably did not notice Wuming's divinity because of the disappearance of all his divinity and Tiamat's crisis. Merlin and Anna also looked at Wuming a few more times. Only Gadotsi and Matthew, who did not understand, were confused. Is it difficult to give away divinity? For Gadotsi, divinity was a strange thing and it was like a consumable. In fact, Gadotsi was not wrong. Didn't Ereshkigal use her divinity to suppress Gorgon? It's troublesome to explain. Let's put it this way, you can understand that the divinity of a god is equivalent to the humanity of a human. Ishtar's analogy made Gadotsi and Matthew nod. But Ishtar is not accurate. After all, we gods belong to the mysterious side. Our divinity can be given away. Maybe in the eyes of humans, humanity cannot be given away, but our divinity can, but it's quite troublesome. There's no need to go into the details. You just have to remember that it's difficult to give away divinity, and you may not be able to get it back. Quizzard ended the topic. Ahem, although Tiamat has awakened, she hasn't made any moves for the time being. Those Ramu and Kururu can't enter the Uruk, so we are safe for now. After the topic ended, Wuming led everyone back to the main topic. Tiamat hasn't made any moves, which is in line with our current situation. My trump card is still a few days away from being ready. In short, in these 2 days we just have to improvise. Wuming put down the Funbaba in his arms and continued. Since Wuming said so, no one said anything since there was no other way. However, Roman, who was in Chaldea, had a strange expression. But there was no other way. The apocalyptic crisis could be solved just by waiting? That was too strange. Anyway, the meeting ended like this. In the end, it was Gilgamesh who forcibly drove everyone out of the throne room. Then, as if it was his daily routine, he began to deal with the government affairs on the clay tablet again. After all, the Uruk's problems were all handed over to Siduri, so they couldn't be properly dealt with. Gadotsi and Matthew were in a state of exhaustion. After leaving the Tower of God, they returned to the Chaldean embassy to sleep. Anna left alone and no one knew where she went. Ishtar was in the limelight and received the worship of the humans. Quizzard was not as vulgar as Ishtar. She brought the leopard man to help build the temporary residence for the new population. Enkidu originally wanted to catch up with Gilgamesh, but when she knew that Gilgamesh had to deal with government affairs, she took the Funbaba somewhere. Anyway, Enkidu and Funbaba were good friends so the two could catch up. In the end, Merlin took the initiative to find Wuming. In a room in the middle of the Tower of God, Merlin and Wuming came directly after they were driven out of the throne room. In front of the large windowless Uruk window, Wuming and Merlin stood side by side and looked at the busy scene in the Uruk city. Have the people from the North Wall arrived? Wuming suddenly asked. Leonidas, Nwakamaru and Musasobo Benke, who were in charge of bringing up the rear, have arrived. There should be no humans outside the Uruk. If the previous evaluation of the Uruk was that almost all the humans of this era have gathered, then the current evaluation of the Uruk could be changed to almost all the humans of this era have gathered. All of this is thanks to you, Villo, Merlin said to Wuming in a rare tone as if he was talking to a friend. However, Wuming smiled. It was indeed his credit to protect the Uruk, but it was also because of the spirit of the humans of this era. Gilgamesh had already told everyone that the world would usher in the end as early as 6 months ago. What did you see when you went to Eric Metropolis? Wuming did not talk to Merlin anymore and directly jumped to the main topic. The battle between the three-headed dragon and the creator dragon god. Merlin was not pretentious and bluntly answered Wuming's question. As expected. What was Wuming thinking? Wuming was, of course, Merlin saw the future from the roller seal of Eric Metropolis. In other words, the future changed by Wuming. Chapter 1009. I was shocked when I saw several futures with my clairvoyance. Now I can finally see a fixed future. Although Merlin, as a nightmare, did not have the colorful emotions of humans, Merlin liked to see happy endings. However, Merlin could not even see an accurate future, let alone happy endings. Instead, he saw several inaccurate futures. There was a future where Chaldea was completely destroyed and Mesopotamia was destroyed. There was a future where Chaldea did not arrive and only King Gilgamesh was left in Mesopotamia. There was even a future where this singularity did not exist at all. How could Merlin, who could not see an accurate future, not worry? However, Wuming spread his hands. There is no fixed and accurate future. What you see is the possible direction of a parallel world. As Wuming said, the future was not fixed. Even without Wuming as a variable, there would be many futures which would lead to the birth of parallel worlds. However, with Wuming's existence as a singularity, its fate would inevitably change and deviate from the original future. This was certain. It was also because of Wuming's interference that Merlin could not see an accurate future, so it was understandable that he was worried. Perhaps Gilgamesh's clairvoyance could not see the future, so he anxiously asked Merlin to find the clay tablet of destiny to see what the future engraved on the tablet said. Things like the future should be experienced by oneself. If you know everything, then what's the point? Maybe the moment you see the future will change because of it. Wuming's implication was that he did not believe in the so-called future. Oh, if only King Gilgamesh could be as open-minded as you. You have to know that when he asked me to go out and find the clay tablet of destiny, it cost me my life. When the 11 magical beast commanders had appeared in the north, Merlin had relied on his illusion to explore the north with great difficulty. He had been very careful, afraid that he would be discovered and slaughtered by the magical beast commanders. It was at that time that Merlin happened to meet Anna, who had just been summoned to this singularity. If Merlin had discovered it a little later, perhaps Anna would have already died at the hands of the magical beast commander. Hen, you've been cooped up in the pagoda all day, it's time for you to come out and get some exercise. Wuming and Merlin once again laughed at his misfortune. You'd better spare me. Merlin found it troublesome to even recite an incantation, let alone go outside. He was a total shut-in. Forget it. Let's stop here. Merlin turned around and walked towards the door. I still have half a piece of butter cake in the Chaldean embassy. I might not be able to eat it in the future, so I have to enjoy it. Merlin, who had already guessed this outcome, even cast a magic spell on the butter cake to maintain its freshness. Hey, it's the end of the world. Are you going to eat cake to get through it? Wuming looked at Merlin with an annoyed expression. Oh, well, anyway, with you here, I think the three-headed dragon will be enough to deal with Tiamat. Merlin, who had turned around, chuckled. No matter how stupid Merlin was, he knew that the three-headed dragon was Wuming's trump card. Although the three-headed dragon was one level lower than the god of creation, Tiamat, if it was Wuming's trump card, then there was no need to worry. Wuming must have done something to it. You trust me that much? Wuming couldn't help but smile. That's for sure. Aren't the others the same? Gadotzi and Matthew trusted Wuming because of his relationship with Wuming. Roman and Leonardo da Vinci trusted Wuming because he had helped Chaldea a lot on this path of humanity's destruction. Moreover, Wuming was powerful, and there was no other way but to rely on him. Gilgamesh trusted Wuming without a reason, and so did Enkidu. Ishtar trusted Wuming for similar reasons. The leopard man relied on his beastly instincts, while Anna followed the crowd to a certain extent. Quizzard did not completely trust him, but there was no other way. If worst came to worst, she would risk her life to attack Tiamat. Although she was a South American goddess, Quizzard was actually a goddess who came to South America from another planet. In a desperate situation, she might be able to kill Tiamat. On the other hand, Merlin trusted Wuming because of their old friendship. To be honest, when I found out that you didn't tell me about Leah's future, I wanted to slap you the next time we meet, Wuming joked. At first, Wuming was still very weak and could not change the ending of King Arthur. Even if he did change a part of it, it still ended with the fall of Arthur's dynasty. Merlin, who had the all-seeing eye, did not tell Wuming about it. Hey, you're the one who messed with my all-seeing eye, okay? Wuming understood what Merlin meant. It was because of him that Merlin could not see the future. Otherwise, Wuming would have slapped Merlin a long time ago. Merlin also thought that he could not see the future and thought that Artoria's future would be changed. Who would have thought that the end result would still be the same? Let's not talk about this anymore. Wu Ming shook his head and walked to Merlin, obviously wanting to leave with Merlin. You're not going to steal my butter cake, are you? What are you thinking? I have something to talk to Anna about, so I'll go to the Chaldean embassy with you. Wu Ming looked at Merlin with disdain. I see. Ahem, but if you want to eat butter cake you can tell me. I'll give you a piece. After all, you're my best friend. Ha, I want all of it. Of course it was a joke. However, Merlin seemed to take it seriously. He did not want to go back with Wu Ming. The two chatted as they left the tower and walked toward the Chaldean embassy not far away. When the two passed by an alley, Wu Ming suddenly stopped and turned his head to look at the alley. In the alley, there was an old man in tattered clothes leaning against the wall. The old man's eyes were covered by a tattered hood, and he looked like he was asleep. Merlin's eyes lit up when he saw the old man, and then he smiled. I'll go back and enjoy my butter cake first. In the end, only Wu Ming and the old man were left in the alley. Wu Ming walked into the alley and sat down face to face with the old man. What do you want from me? Wu Ming also opened the dragon nest dimension and took out a piece of meat pie and handed it to the old man. The old man looked up and stared at Wu Ming with eyes as sharp as an eagle's. After the old man stared at Wu Ming for a while, Wu Ming could not hold back anymore. Chapter 10:10. Seeing an old man like you, anyone would give you some food. And I'm not giving you alms, I'm here to exchange information with you. Interesting. The old man responded to Wu Ming with a deep voice. His voice was full of vigor, just like his eyes. He didn't look like a weak old man at all. Then I'll accept it, the old man said as he reached out and took the pie in Wu Ming's hand. By the way, this is beef filling. You're lucky. Wu Ming smiled mischievously. However, the old man didn't hesitate because of Wu Ming's words and calmly accepted Wu Ming's pie. Seeing that his prank didn't work, Wu Ming smacked his lips and began to talk business. You went to find Tiamat? There was no doubt that this old man was the first Hassan. In Wu Ming's view, the first Hassan only came to him for one thing, and that was Tiamat. The primordial mother is different from before, I can't get close. Wu Ming wasn't surprised by the first Hassan's words. After Wu Ming learned that Tiamat had the black soil, he didn't expect others to attack Tiamat. Sure enough, even the first Hassan couldn't get close to Tiamat. It was very likely that Tiamat's assimilation power was too strong. Forget it, you don't owe me a favor anyway. The first Hassan owed Gadotsi a favor, and the one who needed help was Gadotsi. It had nothing to do with Wu Ming. Even if it had something to do with Wu Ming wouldn't care. You protect Tachika in the dark, I'll do the rest. That's my destiny. The first Hassan nodded. After this short exchange, Wu Ming left the alley. The first Hassan came to tell Wu Ming about Tiamat's unexpected situation. There wasn't much to say at the moment, so Wu Ming left. However, Wu Ming realized a problem from this. Tiamat was not weaker than Gidia. Even if she wasn't stronger, she was at least on par with Gidia. Wu Ming now already knew the identity of Gidia. It was the #1 beast of human evil, Beast Eye. Although Wu Ming had never seen Tiamat, according to the level of the god of creation, she shouldn't be lower than Gidia. Wu Ming already suspected. Wu Ming? I have to be a little more serious. After Wu Ming said that, Kalas on his head understood what Wu Ming meant. The trump card, that was almost completed, was accelerated by Kalas, who was in the route. By tomorrow Wu Ming's trump card would be completed. After leaving the alley, Wu Ming walked back to the Chaldean embassy. The reason he came to this street was to find Anna to deal with some matters. Meeting the first Hassan was a surprise. The Chaldean embassy was not far from the alley where Wu Ming met the first Hassan. After Wu Ming walked out of the alley, it didn't take long for him to reach the Chaldean embassy. However, just as he walked to the entrance of the Chaldean embassy, Wu Ming heard Merlin scream. Ah, Kezapalug, it's my fault, don't kick me anymore. Suddenly the scene of Fufu kicking Merlin's face appeared in Wu Ming's mind. Or perhaps, Merlin had already been kicked down, and Fufu continued to kick his face even more fiercely. Wu Ming lifted the curtain at the entrance and walked straight in. Sure enough, Merlin was lying on the ground and Fufu was lying on Merlin's face, constantly poking Merlin's cheeks with his palms. There were several handprints of Fufu on Merlin's face. After seeing Wu Ming's arrival, Fufu immediately gave up on teaching Merlin a lesson. Like an agile little animal, he directly ran up the stairs and left Wu Ming's sight. Sure enough, Fufu was still afraid of Wu Ming as always. What's wrong with you, you went to that little guy again? Wu Ming, who walked to Merlin's side, pulled Merlin up. Merlin smiled awkwardly. Ahaha, my butter cake is gone, and Kezapulug happened to have traces of butter cake on his mouth? Next, Merlin didn't need to Wuming to know that Merlin must have thought that his treasured butter cake was eaten by Fufu, so he went to reason with Fufu, or maybe even wanted to teach Fufu a lesson. As a result, Merlin was taught a lesson by Fufu. That's good, don't eat it, what's Tiamat's rank? Merlin definitely knew this question. Wuming's sudden question made Merlin stunned for a few seconds. The question of a beast was obviously at the level of the apocalypse. How could Wuming be as relaxed as asking about food and water? But Merlin still answered truthfully. The second beast, Beast 2. Wuming nodded, thinking that Tiamat was also called a beast. By the way, where are Tachika and the others? Merlin pointed upstairs. Tachika and Matthew fell asleep after coming back. Probably because you are here, their tense nerves are rarely relaxed. In addition, I also cast a slight sleep illusion on them. They are now in a state of rest where they won't be easily disturbed by external sounds. Indeed, according to the character of Gadatsi and Matthew, if Wuming wasn't there, the two of them would probably not be able to sleep because of Tiamat. At most, they could only take a nap for a while. Sure enough, the task of saving the world is still too heavy for two little girls. Yes, in Wuming's eyes, Gadatsi and Matthew were just two little girls. Excluding all external factors, Wuming also wanted to help them because of this. It's still a matter of mentality. You see, the people in the city look like they are having a party. Merlin walked to the window and looked at the people coming and going on the street outside. There was no fear on everyone's face. Instead, it was like an ordinary day. There were even many smiling faces. They can still smile in the 6 months of the demonic beast invasion. It really proves that their mentality is much better than Tachika and Matthew, but that's just a matter of time. Gadatsi and Mashu were modern people, but these people were from the gods' generation. In Wuming's view, the people under the rule of Gilgamesh wouldn't be melancholy because of the doomsday that had yet to come. If they were melancholy because of this, it would be a waste of the time before the doomsday. Yes, humans have been trying to enjoy every day. It's really great. Merlin looked at all this with a smile and seemed to enjoy it quite a bit. Wuming felt that Merlin was more and more strange. Even if it was a half-dream demon, it was still a half-dream demon. And for a half-dream demon, nightmares were delicious. How could people who smiled have nightmares? And Merlin liked to see human happy endings. How could this not be strange? However, it was precisely because of this that Merlin could become friends with Wuming. I'm back. At this moment, a greeting voice suddenly came from the door. Wuming turned his head and looked. Anna? Chapter 10-11. Yes, it was the girl Anna who walked in from the door, but now she no longer covered her face with the hood of the cloak, and there was a smile on Anna's face. Welcome back, Anna. Did you go to the old lady's house in the nearby flower shop again? Wuming glanced at Merlin. When he heard Merlin say that Gadatsi and Matthew were sleeping, he also thought that Anna was also sleeping, so he didn't ask where Anna was. In the end, Anna just went out. It could only be said that Merlin played a word game with him. Of course, in the end, it was still Wuming who didn't pay attention to this. Well, I still have to go out. I just came back to put something away. Anna nodded silently. She wasn't surprised that Merlin knew her whereabouts. After all, Merlin was a voyeur. But today, Anna was in a good mood, so she wasn't going to trouble Merlin. Later, under the puzzled eyes of Wuming and Merlin, Anna walked into the kitchen and immediately walked out. After Anna walked out, Wuming immediately spoke. Anna, I have something to ask you. Anna stopped when she heard this, as if she was a little hesitant. Seeing that Anna seemed to have something to do, Wuming proposed a solution. It's just a very ordinary thing. I'll go out with you. We can finish it on the way. Anna thought about it and finally nodded. Later, Wuming and Anna walked out of the Chaldean embassy together. After seeing the two leave, Merlin walked into the kitchen to see what Anna had just taken or put away. As a result, he saw a plate on the kitchen table with a trace of cake left on it. This is the plate I put the butter cake on? Merlin's cry came from the kitchen, alarming the Fufu upstairs. Gadatsi and Matthew did not hear Merlin's cry because of Merlin's illusion. On the street, Wuming glanced at the elven embassy behind him. He seemed to have heard Merlin's sorrowful cry. Or was Wuming hallucinating? Anna, on the other hand, noticed that the wailing belonged to Merlin, but she did not feel guilty at all. What's the matter? Anna's sudden question made Wuming ignore Merlin's sorrowful cry. I have something for you. Then, Wuming waved his hand and a golden ripple appeared in front of Anna. A golden shadow appeared and fell out. Anna subconsciously grabbed it. This is the Holy Grail? That's right, Anna was holding the Holy Grail in her hand. However, Anna was a little puzzled. Why did Wuming give her the Holy Grail? I took this Holy Grail from Winterwood City. Sakura Madu, who was taken away by me, was sealed in the Holy Grail. Wuming's words made Anna's body tremble. As the first master she met, Anna was quite fond of the young Sakura Madu. After learning that Sakura Madu's entire world was burned down, Anna was more than once worried about what would happen to Sakura Madu after she left. Fortunately, in the end, Wuming promised to take good care of Sakura Madu, so Anna left without any worries. Anna originally thought that Sakura Madu would be taken to that place called Chaldea. In the end, Anna did not expect that Sakura Madu would be stuffed into the Holy Grail by Wuming. Cough cough. It's not that it's not good for her. The Holy Grail is more than half a magic furnace. Staying in the Holy Grail for a long time and receiving a large amount of magic power baptism, it's good for increasing her potential and ability as a magician. Wuming seemed to be forcing an explanation as he said it without blushing. At first, Wuming only wanted to temporarily store Sakura Madu in the Holy Grail and release Sakura Madu when he was free. In the end, who would have thought that a series of events would occur, causing Wuming to have no choice but to entrust the Holy Grail to Kingu. Fortunately, Kingu did not do anything to Sakura Madu, or rather, it did not discover that Sakura Madu was in the Holy Grail. In the end, after a series of events, it returned to Wuming's hands. However, what Wuming said about increasing Sakura Madu's ability was not false. When Sakura Madu came out of the Holy Grail, her magic circuit and the quality of her magic power would be greatly improved. Wuming came to find Anna to exchange Sakura Madu with Anna. At the very least, Sakura Madu and Anna had to meet. When to release Sakura Madu from the Holy Grail was also up to Anna to decide. You probably think that you appeared because of Gorgon, but I think that you appeared because of Sakura Madu. After Wuming finished speaking, he closed his mouth, and Anna also fell into silence. The two of them did not stop walking. As Anna, who was extremely compatible with Sakura Madu, and both of them were quite young, the relationship between Sakura Madu and Sakura Madu was no longer limited to the relationship of master and servant. The two of them were already friends and even the only family. Perhaps Sakura Madu, who was sleeping in the Holy Grail, subconsciously summoned Anna in this era. But no matter what, Sakura Madu was fine, and that was the most important thing. Anna, is this the place? Wuming's words pulled Anna back from her thoughts. Anna looked up and saw that she had already arrived in front of a shop with all kinds of flowers. Yes, it's here. Anna nodded. Wuming squatted down and touched Anna's little head. I also know about her situation. After the human nature fever is over, I will properly deal with her problem, but for now you should keep the Holy Grail in her safe. Then Wuming stood up, turned around and left. While Anna continued to be in a daze, an old woman walked out of the flower shop with some trembling. Anna, you're back. Hearing the old woman's voice, Anna instantly hid the Holy Grail under her cloak. Yes, Grandma, I'm back. Did the plate with the butter cake properly return to its original position? Oh, sure enough, the butter cake brought by Anna is more delicious than the one I made. This old woman also rarely enjoyed it. The old woman seemed to be reminiscing, her squinted eyes slightly opened. Anna knew that this old woman was too old to taste anything, but at this moment the old woman was really reminiscing, which meant that she tasted the flavor of the butter cake. Anna didn't notice this before. Obviously, someone did something to the butter cake. Merlin, Anna thought to herself. Yes, I put it back in the kitchen. Grandma, I still think that the butter cake you made is delicious, but next time I will bring you such delicious butter cake again. No need, Anna, this old woman isn't used to such good food, you can keep it for yourself in the future. You are the most beautiful girl I have ever seen, don't wrong yourself. After all, even if this old woman can safely survive the apocalypse, she doesn't have much time left. Also, if you like the butter cake I made, I will make it for you every time you come. No need, Grandma, you need more rest, I will continue to help you take care of the flowers. Anna continued to chat with the old woman while busying herself in the old woman's shop. The old woman took out a garland when Anna wasn't paying attention. Wuming didn't continue to watch but turned around and left. After all, Wuming also guessed what would happen next. Not far away in the Chaldean embassy, Merlin washed the plate that Anna returned before and put it aside. Then he stroked the head of Fufu who came beside him without him knowing. So it was Anna who fed you a little before taking away the cake, Kasapaluk. Chapter 10-12. Wu-Ming came to the Uruk wall where the seal of divinity Dinger was placed and looked towards the southwest. At this moment the dark clouds were approaching the Uruk. Although the sea of black mud could not be seen with the naked eye, Wu-Ming could still feel that the sea level was rising. The sea of black mud that was blocked by Nabistan's tooth was getting more and more turbulent. As the last few humans in the north had retreated into the Uruk, countless Ramu that could not find any living humans were wandering around the vast land outside the Uruk. They were going crazy because they could not enter the Uruk. However, the number of the mermaid Kururu, one of the 11 mythical beasts, was decreasing. It seemed like the other Ramu had killed them and turned them into Ramu. However, no matter how many Ramu there were, they could not enter the wizardry barrier that was set up by Wu-Ming's relic above the Uruk. Bless the world with this body, my god. Treat, level, A++ type, wizardry relic distance, maximum catch. Hyun-Ryong, who was defined as a god, was separated from the humans and returned to heaven. This relic was created by the humans' belief in Hyun-Ryong. It was the last bit of power that protected the humans. It represented the separation of humans and God, which was the gradual disappearance of mysteries. After that, the era of gods would completely disappear and the humans would usher in their own era. The specific effect was that mysteries that were malicious to the humans would be annihilated while mysteries that were kind to the humans would be weakened. This relic represented the irreversible force of the separation of humans and gods and the disappearance of the era of gods. Although it had a certain effect on Wu-Ming and the rest, it only weakened them and did not affect them much. To the mythical beasts, not only were they separated but they were also hostile to the humans. Therefore, when the light film shrouded the Uruk, a small number of Ramu and Kururu in the Uruk light film were physically separated. However, if it was to deal with Tiamat, this relic might not be enough to separate her. Therefore, as long as Tiamat personally came, the human race would definitely perish. However, no matter how hard Wu-Ming looked, he could not see a trace of Tiamat's figure. Hiding underground was even more ridiculous. Zhuge Kongming had already moved the Stone Warrior 8 formations to the southeast. If Tiamat was moving underground, they would be able to discover it. Since there was no sign of Tiamat, it was obvious that Tiamat had not moved at all. Do you think that Ramu alone can destroy mankind? Or does Tiamat have other secrets? Wu-Ming muttered to himself. Wu-Ming believed that the latter was more reliable. At the very least, these Ramu were Tiamat's children. If they could not defeat them after a long time, they would definitely attack Tiamat. His Excellency Hyun-Ryong, a lively childlike voice entered Wu-Ming's ears. Wu-Ming turned his head and found that it was Nuwakamaru. There were two people behind him. They were the remaining two lancers who were guarding the north wall. The soldiers at the north wall had retreated, so they naturally retreated as well. Everyone, how have you been? Wu-Ming greeted them. His Excellency Hyun-Ryong is thinking about Tiamat's matter? Musasobo Benkei, who followed Nuwakamaru to Wu-Ming's side, looked into the distance and said in a muffled voice, Tiamat hasn't moved for so long. There must be something going on. Leonidas, I answered Musasobo Benkei. We can't continue to waste time with Tiamat. If she doesn't come to us, we have to go to her. Wu-Ming's face became firm. They might have to take the initiative to attack. When Nuwakamaru and the other two heard this, their faces changed like Wu-Ming's, but they also agreed with Wu-Ming's words. They had no way to waste time with Tiamat. Several servants belonging to the Uruk were cut off from Gilgamesh's magic supply. They had to rely on food to survive. In addition, all the existing humans in this era were gathered in the Uruk. The food could not last for more than a few days. When the time came, there was no need for Ramu and Tiamat, the humans would starve to death. Your Excellency, do you mean that Tiamat is deliberately wasting time with us? However, Wu-Ming shook his head and denied Musasobo Benkei's words. She doesn't need to do this. I suspect that Tiamat is restricted by something and can't move for a while. It was said that Tiamat had a huge dragon body. She only used her body to carry out physical attacks, and humans would be easily defeated. Therefore, Wu-Ming believed that Tiamat was temporarily unable to move for some reason. Wu-Ming decided to go back and ask Enkidu. She should know about Tiamat. Looking at the gradually darkening sky, Wu-Ming shook his head. Let's wait until tomorrow to let everyone have a good rest tonight. Let's have a good rest tonight. If there's anything we can discuss it tomorrow. The three of them nodded as they understood what Wu-Ming meant. At this moment, Tiamat could not move, and the demonic beasts outside Uruk could not enter. Now was a precious and rare time to rest. How could they not make good use of it? It was a quiet night. Whether it was a king or a civilian, whether it was a servant or a master, everyone had a good rest. After all, with Wu Ming's noble phantasm, they did not have to worry about the invasion of demonic beasts. In the Chaldean embassy, Wu Ming woke up early in the morning and began to prepare breakfast. That's right, Wu Ming stayed in the Chaldean embassy last night. As for the room, Wu Ming slept on the roof. The Mesopotamia region was not said to be like spring all year round, but the temperature difference between summer and winter was not very big. Even if he slept outdoors, it would be fine, not to mention that Wu Ming was a servant. I slept so well last night, Gadatsi yawned as she walked down the stairs and came to the first floor. Yes, senpai. When the doctor contacted me this morning, he said that senpai's body had an unprecedented rest in all aspects. Matthew echoed behind Gadatsi. Fufu, who was like a squirrel, also called twice. Fufu is also very energetic. Matthew picked up Fufu. Gadatsi did not answer Matthew's previous question because she saw Wu Ming. Assassin, you can cook? Gadatsi looked at Wu Ming, who was wearing a Mesopotamia apron, carrying a stack of food that she did not know the name of, to the table. There were several plates on the table, all of which were filled with food that Gadatsi had never seen before. It smells so good. Matthew also ignored the previous topic because of Wu Ming's food. Whoa, I haven't heard of this food for many years. It reminds me of the story of the king who often went to the kitchen to steal food. Merlin also walked down the stairs in a strange manner. Wu Ming glared at Merlin. Merlin smiled awkwardly and did not speak again. After all, if it wasn't for Wu Ming being merciful last night, Merlin would have been the one sleeping on the roof. Is there butter cake? Anna's slightly shy voice followed Merlin's. There is no butter cake, but I made some modern snacks. Anna can try them later. Mesopotamia's butter cake was somewhat different from modern butter cake, so Wu Ming did not try to make it, but he did bake some modern snacks. Go wash up first. There will be guests later. Guests. Gadatsi and Matthew looked at each other, and both saw doubt in each other's eyes. But it did not matter. They would know later. Chapter 10-13. Everyone came to the table after washing up and sat down. They found that there were more and more dishes on the table, and it didn't seem like the 5 of them could finish it all. Villo-senpai? How many guests are there? Matthew wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and smiled awkwardly. Don't worry, they're here. Wu Ming pointed to the door and 3 figures appeared at the door. Miss Nawakamaru? Mr. Chin? Mr. Leonidas? Matthew was surprised. Mr. Fujimaru, Mr. Matthew, long time no see. Nawakamaru greeted them calmly, but she didn't have much contact with Chaldea, so she didn't say much. Musasobo Benkei and Leonidas I were the same. The 3 of them were either at the northern wall or at the temporary stronghold built in the northwest, while Fujimaru and the others were either in the Uruk or the dense forest in the south. Although they were familiar with each other, they were only familiar with each other. In terms of familiarity, Wu Ming was much more familiar to Nawakamaru than Gadatsi and the others. Nawakamaru and the others sat down calmly, but the inexplicably lengthened table and the dishes on the table still couldn't be finished by 3 more people. At this time, a lively voice came from the door. Yo, big sister, I'm here. Quizzard dragged the weak leopard man into the Chaldean embassy. She found a seat and sat down, and instantly threw the leopard man to the seat next to her. Miss Quizzard is here too? Matthew was surprised again. Gadatsi was quite interested in the leopard man's current state, but she could probably guess that he was beaten up by Quizzard because he provoked Quizzard. I was invited by Hyunryong for breakfast. Quizzard smiled sweetly at Gadatsi. So, Nawakamaru and the others are the same? Gadatsi guessed. Yes, Mr. Fujimaru, we're not the only ones invited. As if agreeing with Nawakamaru's words, another person, or rather a golden king, came in from the entrance of the Chaldean embassy. This king's arrival, the entire Chaldean embassy seems to be a lot brighter. The newcomer was naturally Gilgamesh. King Gilgamesh? This time Gadatsi and Matthew were shocked. They really didn't expect Gilgamesh to be among the guests. What's the point of being so arrogant? Even if it's brighter, it's all because of this goddess. Ishtar, who came in later, crossed her arms and looked at Gilgamesh with disdain. Oh, the goddess of greed even wants to take this king's glory for herself. Gilgamesh mocked mercilessly. You shiny golden guy? I hope you die of overwork? However, before Gilgamesh and Ishtar could quarrel, Saduri's figure came in. Okay, king and goddess, today you were invited by Hyunryong-sama to enjoy breakfast. You can't be so rude. Her words, which were neither flattering nor harsh, made Gilgamesh and Ishtar both shut their mouths. Saduri, the two of them really can't do anything to you. Enkidu, who had a smile on his face, walked in holding Fanbaba's hand. You're exaggerating. Saduri bowed. In this regard, Gadatsi and Matthew were almost stunned. Good heavens, all the powerful forces of this era had gathered together. However, only Wuming knew that Ereshkigal was still missing, but that couldn't be helped. After all, she couldn't leave the underworld. Okay, everyone, hurry up and take a seat. This is my cooking that I haven't made for a long time. Hurry up and try it. Hearing this, Gilgamesh and the others also sat down. Seeing so many powerful gods and kings sitting next to them, Gadatsi and Matthew were a little uncomfortable. The two were still thinking about whether to change seats. However, Gilgamesh also said that this banquet was hosted by Wuming after all, and even he couldn't steal the limelight. What he meant was, no matter who was in charge, they could sit anywhere. Everyone began to enjoy the food. At this moment, it was as if they really obeyed Gilgamesh's order. Everyone, including Gadatsi, was no longer restrained and completely let go of their limbs. Leonidas I and Musasobo Benkei competed in drinking, Quizzard as the big sister, played with Gadatsi, Matthew and Anna discussed which snacks Wuming made were delicious, Gilgamesh and Ishtar were once again at each other's throats, and Saduri was the lubricant between them. Enkidu looked at this scene and smiled helplessly, then looked at Wuming, who was chatting with Nawakamaru. As for the leopard man, he was bragging with Fanbaba and Fufu, but he was ignored by the two beasts. Now it didn't seem like they were facing the coming doomsday at all, but more like an ordinary party. Roman, who was in Chaldea and watching this scene through Gadatsi's bracelet, sighed. I really don't know whether to be happy or sad. By the way, Roman showed a tangled expression. Roman was happy to see everyone in a good mood, but their good mood made Roman a little worried. After all, there was still the threat of Tiamat. However, Leonardo da Vinci didn't care so much, instead he smiled. This is a bit like a different version of The Last Supper. The Last Supper that Leonardo da Vinci made before his death seemed to be comfortable, but it was actually a crisis. Now, the banquet in the Chaldean embassy was just like that. You're so careless. Roman rolled his eyes at Leonardo da Vinci. This was probably the benefit of being a servant, there was no need to think too much. But, no matter how you look at it, it's breakfast. Looking at the harmonious table in the monitor, Roman gave up complaining about Leonardo da Vinci, and he gradually immersed himself in this warm scene. After all, it's good to do this occasionally, isn't it? I'm hungry, I'm going to get a cup of coffee. Roman got up and left the monitor. However, Leonardo da Vinci sat in Roman's position and waved at Roman like a rich man. By the way, help me get a cup, the cup is next to the coffee machine, thank you. Yes, understood. The meal was very fast, and the delicious food that everyone enjoyed in Chaldean embassy was quickly wiped out. After that, everyone went to the highest floor of the tower, Gilgamesh's office, between the throne. Gilgamesh, who was sitting on the high throne, glanced at the people standing neatly in front of him and immediately spoke. So, Tiamat's counterattack strategy meeting, let's start now. Gilgamesh's imposing words entered everyone's ears, and most people's faces became extremely serious. The reason why it was most people was because there were a small number of people who didn't become serious, but showed a surprised expression. Hey? Wait a minute, counterattack? Are we going to counterattack Tiamat? Chapter 10:14. Matthew and Gadatsi were the only two people who were surprised. That's right. I think you have also noticed that we don't have much food left, and all the humans in Mesopotamia have gathered in the Uruk. Although there is no problem for the time being, in a few days the shortage of food will appear and we will be in trouble. Gadatsi and Matthew heard Wuming's words and instantly understood. After all, they were modern people, and they could understand what would happen in the Uruk through the usual compulsory education. At that time, humans would starve to death because they were trapped in the Uruk without food, and in serious cases, there might be riots. After all, appetite was one of the most basic desires of humans, and there was no way to suppress it. Once it broke out, it would be more terrible than a natural disaster. Outside the Uruk were Ramu, and humans could not go out to look for food. Only servants could do it, but there was no way to get food for so many people with only a few servants. Therefore, the only way was to take the initiative to attack, and the main attacker was Wuming. Wuming talked to Gilgamesh last night about this matter, and Gilgamesh also agreed. In fact, whether we take the initiative to attack or wait for Tiamat to attack, our chances of winning are very low. Leonardo da Vinci's voice came from Gadazzi's bracelet. After all, the opponent was the god of creation. So, whether we take the initiative to attack or passively defend, the probability of winning is almost the same. Although Roman's words were discouraged, it also meant that taking the initiative to attack was better than passively defending. Why didn't Tiamat take the initiative to attack? Gadazzi was quite puzzled. That's because Mother is bound. Enkidu stood up. Bound? Matthew could not help but be stunned. And that's the binding that Tiamat put on herself. Wu Ming interrupted. What? Whether it was Gadazzi, Matthew, or the others, they were more or less surprised by this. What? Gadazzi asked. She didn't understand why she would impose restrictions on herself. Because Mother has always loved humans and their children, that's why she added restrictions to herself. Enkidu, who had fused with Kingu, was well aware of this. Wu Ming had also asked Enkidu about this last night. At this moment, Gilgamesh, who was sitting on the throne, suddenly interrupted. Do you know that humans are evil? Humans are evil? Gadazzi and Matthew looked at each other in confusion. The two goddesses, Quizzard and Ishtar, had a serious look in their eyes. It was obvious that the two of them knew that humans were evil. Humans are evil. Roman from Chaldea repeated silently. Humans are evil beasts of original sin. There are a total of 7 original sin beasts, and they are disasters that can destroy humans. Merlin also spoke. But in the end it was still Roman who explained. Humans are evil refers to various disasters that threaten human history and destroy humans. They are born from human civilization and grow stronger with the development of human civilization. They will destroy the civilization from the inside of human society. They are like cancer cells. Furthermore, as long as human beings exist, this evil will not disappear. It will grow stronger with the development of human civilization. To put it simply, it was an existence that accompanied humans. Because of the disasters caused by the bestial nature of humans, humans are also called beasts. Tiamat is the second beast that holds the principle of return, Beast 2. Merlin finished Roman's sentence, then looked at Wu Ming and signaled for Wu Ming to continue. With a helpless smile, Wu Ming spoke. The essence of human evil is human love. It is precisely because of this that Tiamat, who loves her lover and her children, will become one of the human evils. Gadazzi and Matthew suddenly understood. After that, Wu Ming inexplicably thought of the human final trial he encountered in the box garden world. Moreover, human evil is not the evil that destroys humans, but the evil that destroys humans. That is, the existence that humans need to overcome. Only by overcoming it can humans continue to develop. Therefore, in a sense, it is not wrong to call it the human final trial. After all, human evil is a disaster for humans, and it is not wrong to call it the human final trial. The existence that needs to be overcome, human final trial. Matthew and Gadazzi, who were present as humans, muttered silently. Seeing Gadazzi and Matthew in deep thought, Wu Ming walked in front of the two, stretched out his hand and gave them a knock on the head. It hurts? Signor Villo. Gadazzi covered her head with tears and looked at Wu Ming. Matthew performed better than Gadazzi. He did not cry out in pain, but she also covered her head. Although it is said that the human final trial needs humans to overcome it, it is just a formality. It is not necessary for humans to overcome it. For the self-destruction mechanism of humans such as the 7 human evils, the suppression force has already prepared a corresponding safety device, which is the 7 crown servants. The shaped moon world is different from the box garden world. In the box garden world, the human final trial is a special existence. To defeat, kill, or even overcome the other party requires special conditions. The most critical condition is that you must have the identity of a human. The human final trial in the shaped moon world is just a title that Wu Ming casually said. It has no special power, so humans do not need to overcome it personally. Seeing the doubts on their faces, Wu Ming directly gave an example. The first Hassan you have seen is the crown assassin. These words directly made Gadazzi and Matthew almost fall to the ground. They knew that the first Hassan was very strong, but they didn't expect the other party to have such an identity. In other words, the reason why the first Hassan helped us is because of the appearance of one of the human evils? However, no one answered Gadazzi's question. Because the people present were very clear that Tiamat had undergone a qualitative change. She was no longer a simple human evil. Even the first Hassan couldn't even get close to Tiamat. All of this was attributed to the root black mud, and it was precisely because of this that Wuming took all the burden on himself. Emotionally, only Wuming could deal with Tiamat, who was infected with the root black mud. Others were easily eroded by the black mud and assimilated. Reasonably, the root black mud and Wuming had a great relationship. The reason why Tiamat was infected with the root black mud may have an indirect relationship with Wuming. Therefore, Wuming had to take on this burden. In short, my trump card can deal with Tiamat. You just need to be responsible for covering me. Chapter 10-15. Wuming said as he stretched out his hands and rubbed Gadatsi and Matthew's little heads. In fact, Wuming didn't mention one thing. He was worried that Tiamat had other means. Therefore, Wuming chose to let himself, the only one who was not afraid of the black root soil, face Tiamat, so as not to let other people have an accident. After being attached by the black root soil, in addition to being hostile to Wuming, their own abilities would also be changed or enhanced. That is, the enemy who was already very powerful would become even stronger. As the god of creation, Tiamat was already very strong, and with the blessing of the black root soil she would definitely become stronger, and maybe she would have some new tricks. The best way was to let some people stay in the Uruk. Wuming had already talked to Gilgamesh about this issue last night. Therefore Gilgamesh directly ordered, "Now let's discuss the problem of grouping. After that, let's face the god of creation and launch the final attack." The humans in the Uruk were still doing their duty, and even most of the soldiers were arranged by Gilgamesh to do something within their ability. Only some soldiers were still guarding the 360-degree city wall surrounding the Uruk, and their task was only to be stationed on the city wall to monitor the movements of the Ramu army outside. After all, ordinary human soldiers were not useful at all in this counterattack strategy. Although it was cruel to say that human soldiers couldn't do anything in the face of the Ramu army except to die and increase the combat power of the Ramu army. On the city wall in the southwest corner of the Uruk, Gilgamesh, Gadatsi, Matthew, the followers and several Quizzards pterosaurs gathered together. However, everyone was clearly divided into two teams and stood in front of Gilgamesh. Quizzard, Ishtar, Gadatsi, Matthew, Merlin, Nuwakamaru, and Musasobo Benkei were responsible for covering Wuming. Enkidu, Fanbaba, Leonidas I, Anna, and Leopard Man were responsible for guarding the Uruk with Gilgamesh. Quizzard and Ishtar were very powerful goddesses, so naturally they wouldn't choose to stay behind. Although Nuwakamaru was a general-like figure, his class was rider, and his mobility wasn't low, he was more suitable for taking the initiative to attack. After Musasobo Benkei overcame his fear, he had to follow Nuwakamaru no matter when and where unless he died. Nuwakamaru had to admit that this made her feel very helpless. Although she was very pleased that Sea Lord Changlu had become so brave, there was no need for him to become so excessive, it was almost becoming an obsession. Therefore, Nuwakamaru and Musasobo Benkei were assigned to the attack team, and Leonidas I was forced to stay behind because of his strong defensive ability. Enkidu and Fanbaba were instructed by Wuming to stay behind, and Anna also stayed behind because of Wuming's concern. After all, Anna still needed to protect the Holy Grail where Sakura Madu was. As for the Leopard Man, he was instructed by Quizzard to stay behind. According to Quizzard's words, don't underestimate the Leopard Man. However, anyone could tell that this wasn't the real reason. In short, Wuming was relieved to have a good defensive team guarding the Uruk. Moreover, there was also Zhuge Kong Ming, who hadn't shown his face since returning to the Uruk. Wuming believed that even if there was an accident, the Uruk would be safe with the presence of staying behind. As for why Merlin joined the attack team, it was entirely because he was coerced by Wuming. With Gilgamesh and Zhuge Kong Ming, there was no need for Merlin to stay behind at all. In addition, Merlin had been pretending to be weak, so Wuming, who was a little unhappy, made this decision. Finally, it was Gadatsi and Matthew. Gadatsi and Matthew could stay in the Uruk. There was no need for them to go out and take risks. Although Gadatsi and Matthew's decision was strongly opposed by the two at first, after listening to Gadatsi's reason, the way everyone looked at Gadatsi changed. Human evil needs to be overcome by humans. I won't and don't want to escape. Even if the main attacker was Wuming, Gadatsi believed that as the only master of mankind and one of the last remaining humans, she had to bear witness to all this. It didn't matter even if the end was really death. Wuming was very sure that Gadatsi was touched by his previous words. Although he was worried about Gadatsi's safety, Wuming also felt gratified for Gadotsi at the same time. It was the kind of gratification that one would feel when seeing their younger sister grow up. And not only Wuming but the others were also touched by this. If Quizzard and Ishtar still regarded Gadotsi as an immature little girl before, now they have regarded Gadotsi as a real qualified master. Matthew was affected by Gadotsi's strong inner feelings and supported Gadotsi's idea. Moreover, as Gadotsi's follower, Matthew had no reason to let his master go to the front line alone. Therefore, Matthew would also follow Quizzard and others to cover Wuming. For the decision of the two, Gilgamesh also praised Gadotsi and Matthew, saying that there really are people in the future who didn't let this king down. At this moment, Gilgamesh faced the people who were divided into two teams and repeated the content of the plan. The defense team will stay with this king in Uruk to prevent accidents or provide support. The attack team needs to take Quizzard's pterosaur to the Persian Gulf, and then fully cover Hyunryong to release his trump card to eliminate Tiamat. Of course, your own safety is the prerequisite, that's all. Is there a problem? No. Although only Gadotsi and Matthew answered, in fact, Gilgamesh was talking to Gadotsi and Matthew. After all, everyone else was a servant. To put it bluntly, the servant's body was not the servant's body. If they died, they would die and there would be no image. But if Gadotsi and Matthew as human beings had an accident, there would be no room for recovery. Then Roman's voice came from Gadotsi's bracelet. According to the detection, the number of Ramu on the land has exceeded 300 million, and it is still increasing. The speed of the increase of Ramu is also rising rapidly. Roman and Leonardo da Vinci in Chaldea looked at the number of Ramu on the screen that was still increasing, and they couldn't help but frown. Although this was bad news, there was also good news at the same time. However, these Ramu can only move on the ground. There are no aerial units yet. After all, there was already the winged mermaid Kururu that could fly in the sky, so Roman also paid attention to it. But there is no guarantee that there will not be any enemy flying units, so when you get close to Tiamat, you must be very careful. Don't relax your vigilance against the Ramu just because they can fly. Leonardo da Vinci also warned. Of course, he was still talking to Gadotsi and Matthew. Yes, we understand, Leonardo da Vinci. Gadotsi nodded seriously. Finally, as the Uruk king, Gilgamesh issued the final order. So, let's go, everyone. This king is looking forward to your triumphant return. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.